Very good morning to you. Yes, we're live from Johannesburg. Myself and Kendall Elvis, of course, he's still recovering from a small procedure, but he'll be back tomorrow. That's what we are told.
Looking forward to seeing him, and we've got lots on the cards today.
Yeah, we do. And you know, this is the story that really beats me. It's the child killings that are happening in South Africa today. It's like, again, one of our top stories, and it's another child being killed, this time a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old yesterday. It seems to continually happen.
The predatory instinct in human beings is absolutely terrifying. How can anybody prey on defenseless children?
Yeah, it's not like it's organ harvesting or anything like this. It's killing for pleasure. So we're asking you, are we missing something? What are we missing with regards to child murders here in South Africa? What do you think?
Well, Julie Kennedy has come in with the lack of resources to affordable daycare, as well as lack of information for the parents on how to educate and inform our children.
You know, I was told this morning by somebody that these are all dealing with the symptoms. Well, we should deal with the problem itself. What is the problem? The Ayatollah tells us, honestly speaking, I'm out of ideas. The country needs divine intervention now. That's a sentiment that a lot of people have. We are overstimulated with regards to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Chira Bell Bottom says our Western ways have created this cruelty, and we lost humility in fatherhood. We need the death penalty to instigate fear in crime itself.
Western ways and the death penalty. Ikonanazo under a new name, I see. Western ways and the death penalty. Oh, are they mutually exclusive? Anyhow, let's carry on with our poll today, because here in South Africa, we're always dealing with death and racism. The two are mutually exclusive, it seems.
It's quite interesting how South Africa just stands out with those two. The question that we've got for you in our poll for today, is racism still a problem in our schools?
Religious intolerance is the other one. You know, a Dompas needed to go to Northcliff High, and my son is at that school. I've got lots of issues at that school. You know, that particular school, They don't even allow a soccer ball onto the premises, which is something that I think we need to talk about. But 26% are saying, 88 out of 26 people are saying it is a problem. What are you guys tweeting us with regards to that? There we go.
All right, we've got very much who's come in with, yes, racism remains a problem in our schools because we as parents do not teach our children how to love and respect one another.
But is it only the children? Sometimes educators are involved. In this case, educators don't want people to wear a headscarf in school. This one from Ikonanazo, he says, yes, we still experience racism in this world, so schools are not immune. The challenge is the mind of racists, dirty parents. Some say there are educators that are suffering similar issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because, you know, those same educators are parents themselves.
Correct.
So Katlego KG comes and says, yes, and it all begins at home. Children sometimes are a reflection of what's at home. And teachers play a big role in racial divisions or racial unity.
Absolutely, Katlego, you're on point there. The latest one, I could not believe it when I read this morning. It was actually said that I suffered from stress. That's why I used the K word.
Unbelievable. That child got that from somewhere. They didn't make it up.
Unbelievable. Anyhow, we've got a sports question, and today it's all tough questions, none easy. Now, terror attacks in London, they don't call off the Champions Trophy. If it happened in South Africa, do you think, or even in Zimbabwe or any of the other, Pakistan,
India,
we'd be
having a very different conversation, even. And I think it's not even just now the stabbings that happened on London Bridge. It's been a spate of terror attacks in England, not just London.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, if it happened anywhere else, the English team would have been removed from the tournament. Even the Australians would have gone home. No doubt about that. If there were terror attacks in South Africa, that's what they would have done. Should the Champions Trophy then be called off for security reasons, or don't we, because it's in London?
That's the question we've got for you for today on our sports question. We'd really love to get your thoughts on that, because we think it is pertinent in this day and age.
Absolutely. Anyhow, let's get into our work. Here are the top stories. A statement in which Lesotho's Deputy Prime Minister, Mototjoa Metsing, tells his supporters that they have to protect the army because it helped them into power is trending and attracting many questions. Now, there may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings in Gauteng after identikits of two suspects in the murder case of a 9-year-old boy from Johannesburg have now been released. And the principal of Northcliff High here in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark, has spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offense caused to Muslim learners and their families. Those are our top stories right here, right now. Let's get the sport headlines with Ken.
Yevon, thank you very much. Looking forward to the rest of the bulletin with all those heavy stories that you've got on the cards there. Good morning to you. This is what we have for you in the sports today.
He's got all the qualities, all of the qualities that you want from your captain.
Bafana Bafana coach Stuart Baxter makes no bones about making Thulani Hlashwayo his captain.
Hopefully we can get off to a good start, get out of the blocks. Is that what this team actually needs at this point in time? Just a little bit of confidence.
Ahead of their crucial test season opener against France, Alice de Coutier is hopeful and slightly optimistic for a win on the weekend.
Murray, the #1 player in the world, comes through with flying colours today.
And Andy Murray is back to his best as he thrashes Karin Khachanov in straight sets to storm into the French Open quarterfinals. All this in more detail we've got for you at 10 for you. Stay with Yevon because he's got the news.
Yeah, our top story, and I can tell you this is a developing story. We'll develop it throughout the show as it seems, as there are, well, uneasiness after the elections in Lesotho. A statement made by Lesotho's Deputy Prime Minister, Motsejoa Metsing, urging his supporters to protect the army because it helped them into power, is trending and raising a lot of questions there after the election. Speaking at an impromptu gathering at his party headquarters in Maseru, Metsing admitted they didn't perform as well as they had hoped in the elections, presumably referring to an election pact he went into with the Prime Minister, Pakalita Mosisili.
He says they have to talk to other parties, even those that were their enemies. He says the army put its head on the block for them to be in power now. They can't let Thabani win. They have to protect them.
Well, as I say, that story is developing. We'll be talking to several sources throughout this morning to get more details to what really is happening in Lesotho. Meanwhile, of course, election observers have also raised concern over the overlapping roles between the army and the police in the country. This after the IEC expressed shocked that the army have been deployed at polling stations over the weekend.
Observers have commended the IEC for a job well done and declared the elections reasonably free, fair and credible, but they all agree that Saturday's deployment of the army raised fears.
The mission has been assured by the Strategic High Command of the Lesotho Defence Forces that they will support whatever party wins the 3rd of June elections, and that the Defence Forces will operate within the confines of the law as provided for in the Constitution.
The African Union recommends a review of the electoral model that has produced unstable coalition governments. SADC recommends making it more stringent for parties to be given campaign funding. Observers recommend a review of access to state media to level the playing field, better facilities for the disabled, and efforts to get more women into politics. Ntakwana Ngatani, SABC News, Maseru, Lesotho.
We'll get another update from Ntakwane, well, a little bit later in the show. Now, there may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings here in Gauteng. Identikits of 2 people suspected of kidnapping and killing a 9-year-old boy from Orange Farm, south of Johannesburg, have been released now. Keketso Matlakwana was snatched outside his Lenasia school on May 16 and his body found 3 days later. Police are now widening the scope of the investigation to see if the suspects can be linked to any other cases of abduction.
A senseless killing. Little Keketso kidnapped by 3 occupants of a combi and his body found here with multiple stab wounds. Now police believe they are close to arrests. These, 2 of the 3 suspected killers.
There were 3 people who were in the Kumbi, 1 female and 2 males. So far, we are trying to get the person who can assist us with the other ID kit. And we will make sure that we interlink with the other cases and see if these suspects who were involved in the kidnapping of the boy were not linked to other cases.
The statistics indicate a war on children like Keketso. While the boy's family is still demanding answers, an impassioned plea.
I would like to call to all the people at large, the community, to assist the police into finding the perpetrators, because of already there's 2 people who have been positively identified, and we just need closure.
The Mahlakwanas hope that the brutal death of their son will be the last. Griselda Lewis, SABC News in Johannesburg.
It's a nationwide problem. Learners and teachers from Cedar High School at Rocklands in Mitchell's Plain in the Western Cape, they are expected to embark on a march today against violence against women and children. Organisers of the march say that this senseless violence affects everybody. Now, this march follows a number of recent incidents in Cape Town in which children reported missing were later found dead. The number is 19 since the start of the year. In most cases, they were killed by people known to them. It's reported that, well, around 20 or confirmed 20 have been killed since January of this year. Of course, we've been asking you that as our question of the day. The killings continue unabated. What are we missing with regards to child murders here in South Africa? Tweet us. I'd like to hear what you think. I don't think many people know what's going on. Now, another disturbing story. The principal of Northcliff High School here in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark, has spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offense caused to Muslim learners and their families. The issue arose when an upset parent took to social media questioning why her daughter had to carry a special card stating that she had been granted permission to wear a headscarf for religious purposes. While Essex Clark did apologize, he added that concession cards had been implemented years ago and did not only apply to Muslim learners.
We've given them this concession card so that any teacher querying their different attire can see that their uniform is legitimate and done with the full permission of the school's management. The idea has been, the last 2 that I gave out were for 2 boys who were in our major production that wanted to grow their hair longer for the roles that they were playing on the stage. Those are the last 2 that I signed.
Of course, we've seen issues of racism elsewhere in the country, so we've been running a poll and, well, asking you guys to go out and vote there and tell us, what do you think? Why is racism still a problem at this point? And one could add religious intolerance at this point. Why is it still a problem in South Africa? You're up to 45 votes now with 91% saying, yes, it is a problem. Yes, it is a problem, and that in itself, that number should concern us. Meanwhile, South Africans from across the country have taken to social media to express their disgust as an audio clip of the Pietermaritzburg Girls High School student using the K word to describe black students trended. That was the poll that we asked you on. Of course, we heard since that the learner was stressed. That's why the word was used. What do you think about that? Go to our poll, tweet us and tell us what you think. I'd love to see, what you guys are thinking with regards to that. Now, of course, they say the rain is coming tomorrow in the Western Cape and everyone is dancing for joy already. Now, the city is still urging residents to ensure that they keep an emergency supply of water as interruptions will occur in the coming weeks. This follows the implementation of level 4 water restrictions, which allow residents to only use water for essential washing, drinking and cooking purposes. And there on the screen you can see what you can do with 100 litres a day. Yes, these are the restrictions in place, of course, in Cape Town. Now, authorities in the Western Cape, they say they are working to avoid taps from running dry as the province continues to struggle through the drought. Water shortages have seen 6 areas, including Cape Town, being declared local disasters. Several municipalities are enforcing tight restrictions as provincial dam levels have now dropped below 19% this week. Long-term rainfall forecasts for this winter is still unclear in the Western Cape. Are there plans in place to assist the Western Cape, and are other provinces safe from this drought? To find out, well, we are joined by the Department of Water and Sanitation spokesperson, Sputnik Ratau. He's in our Pretoria studio this morning. Sputnik, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Evan, and thanks for the time.
Sputnik, the weatherman tells me that there's a massive storm coming tomorrow to the Cape, but that's not going to help in the immediate term. Are there plans to assist the Western Cape with this crisis?
Yes, we are working together with the province of the Western Cape and especially the city of Cape Town in order to try and bring relief to the area in a number of ways. One of which obviously is the issue of looking at how we can be able to access about the 10% that is still available in the Drought Dam through the creation of a tunnel that will then be able to allow us to access that water. Another way in which we are working together with the city and the province is through looking at accessing the group aquifer at Table Mountain that can be able to also assist us in terms of accessing extra water. What the minister has also agreed to do, or rather given directive to do, is to fast-track the fuel flow augmentation program and has given a directive to the Trans-Caledon Transfer Authority, the TCTA, to actually work closer to doing this in a quicker way. And we are looking at commencement by the beginning of 2018 to bring this to pass. But also looking at what we can do in terms of the fuel flow augmentation project so that we can be able to see how we can be able to access the bit of water that is still available in these critical dams that serve especially the city of Cape Town.
Sputnik, these are all wonderful plans and very necessary, but the critics in Cape Town are saying that these plans should all have been implemented 15 years ago. Why weren't it?
Well, the difficulty with a drought, Eben, is that you can never tell what kind of impact it will have at any one time. And the truth of the matter is that the plans to augment the fuel flow as well as the issues of looking at the aquifer have always been there. What needs to happen now is that we need to fast track those. It's not like they were not, they have not been in the pipeline. But obviously, all of these things need time. All of these things need proper planning. All of these things need proper funding, and so on and so forth. So it's something that we have been looking at, and that is why it has been part of our plans all the time.
Now, Sputnik, of course, it's not only Cape Town that's suffering. Give us a quick overview. What does the picture look in the rest of the country? The Eastern Cape, I understand, are also suffering a little bit.
The Eastern Cape even also did not receive that great amount of rainfall over the past rainy season. And yes, the dam levels there are actually lower than they were a year ago. And therefore, the issue of water availability in the Eastern Cape is a challenge that we are looking at. And part of what we are hoping that will assist is the early snowfalls that we are seeing in that part of that we have seen in that part of the country, together with the mountainous areas of KZN and Lesotho. And what we are looking at also is some of the other plans that we might need to bring ahead of time in order for us to be able to look at that. But also, we must keep reminding ourselves that as a country, unless we really look at the issue of water saving and water conservation, we will always get into these things, even if we do receive sufficient rainfall.
Now, it looks, you talk about that rainfall, Sputnik, it looks like we might get a massive storm in the Western Cape, in the catchment area specifically, in the next couple of days, and that's the good news. But that doesn't mean that people should change their behavior.
It doesn't mean that people should change the behavior, because even what those storms might actually create are flash floods in certain areas. And you might find that in the ultimate, the catchment areas may not necessarily be recharged as sufficiently as we would love them to be. So the issue of the first thing is the issue of people looking after themselves. That is why the Provincial Disaster Management Center will be putting out, sharing a report this morning within the province as to what the expectations are. And that report must inform how the people in the affected areas must look at those gale force winds, those amounts of rainfall that will come in, because we will be looking at some rains coming in, but also just for people to be careful around those waters, because in case of flash floods, we might have to look at how people are assisted to be able to continue with save lives.
Sputnik, thank you very much for that update. That's Sputnik Qatar. He's the spokesperson for the Department of Water and Sanitation here in South Africa. And if you're living in Cape Town, in the Eastern Cape, 100 litres a day, that's what you have to use for the foreseeable future until that level 4 restrictions are lifted. And I'll show you again a little bit later after the break what you can do with 100 litres of water a day. Anyhow, there's a lot happening on social media. As you can imagine, people are not happy with racism and child killings and all sorts of other things continually being in the news. But we'll start with something quite familiar to all of us, and that's the hashtag protest. Yes, protest against gender-based violence that took place in Cape Town yesterday. This is in light of the continuous rape and murder cases of women and especially young children. There's another march today there. Then racist incidents at schools well under the spotlight. Now the one incident people are talking about, of course, is at a Pietermaritzburg school. Now Andile says the following: I blame the parents for instilling racism to their children at home. High school pupils are too young to use apartheid language. Hashtag school racism. Yes, Andile, that's on point. Then, of course, at Northcliff High School, officials, well, they're asking Muslim girls to carry concession scarves to wear headscarves during this month of Ramadan. Now, the principal there has already apologized. And then as Ramadan continues, there are some incredible images coming from prayer gatherings around the world. This was a view from a helicopter in Medina. What an incredible picture. Now, the big story, of course, in that part of the world follows the Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE cutting diplomatic ties with Qatar. They say that the country, well, has links to terror attacks and blame them for the rise thereof. However, flights around the Middle East are now jam-packed as, well, they try to avoid Saudi Arabia. Here is an image of what the flight plans look like. It's causing quite a bit of chaos there, as you can imagine. The hashtag is Qatar. In the UK, the threat level remains severe following the attack in London and the Manchester massacre. However, Ariana Grande and other top musicians hosted a One Love concert at which victims were honoured. Hashtag Manchester if you've missed it. Also, of course, the hashtag robot police is now a real thing in Dubai. That's a picture of what robot police is going to look like in the city of Dubai. Well, interesting. That's the future that we are heading into. Now let's take a look at our picture of the day. This one, of course, deals with the most controversial card in South Africa of the last 24 hours. Kasim Simji says, Northcliff High School asking Muslim girls to carry concession cards to wear a headscarf. And he hashtags it. He says, apartheid Dompas card. Those of you who remember can never forget those painful memories. That's the card to wear a headscarf during the month of Ramadan at our Northcliff High here in Johannesburg. Our comment of the day. Our comment of the day deals with, well, the other issue we have today. This one from Abigail van Heerden, who says, heartbroken to hear of that stress. Yes, is an excuse for racism at my old school. Talking about racism at the Peter Maritzburg Girls High School. And she goes on and finishes up there. So when will things change? When we change. Anyhow, let's go to the courts now. What's happening in the courts? We'll start in Limpopo province, where a 43-year-old man is expected to apply for bail at the Masisi Periodical Magistrates Court. The suspect faces a charge of defeating the ends of justice and the murder of his girlfriend, Mbudziso Manakisa. Now, Gideon Korombi, who is a small-scale farmer, was allegedly the last person to be seen in the company of Mbudziso. Her burnt body was discovered in the bush not far from the suspect's small holding at Domboni village almost 3 weeks after she disappeared from her home. Then in the northwest, the trial of an, alleged assassination plotter is expected to resume this morning at the Lehuruche Regional Court. A former Mahikeng local municipal councillor was arrested late last year after allegedly being linked to a conspiracy to murder the Northwest Premier, Supra Mahumapelo. Now, Lekalatladi allegedly consulted a Botswana witch doctor to helping in the killing of Mahumapelo and other ANC senior councillors within the Ngakamodiri Molema district municipality. Interesting story. We'll keep you updated. We'll be with you after a short break. We'll continue talking about, water issues. Don't miss it.
The fossil hominid sites at Sterkfontein Caves, known as Cradle of Humankind, were declared a World Heritage Site on the 2nd of December 1999. The Cradle of Humankind covers an area of over 47,000 hectares of privately owned land northwest of Johannesburg. Most of the site is on dolomite, a rock type which is slightly soluble in water. There are currently over 200 caves on the site and 13 fossil sites. We know that Australopithecus africanus were present in the cradle from about 2 to 4 million years ago. It is generally known that hominids are close relatives of human ancestors.
A top 5 rated horse racing event in the world, fashion is a highlight for those in attendance. All decked out in blue and white, the Lomorians Queen Plate is the premier event that kicked off everyone's social calendar.
That it was all part of my master plan to cast John Legend but deprive him of his normal instrument and give that one to Ryan.
The House of Truth is not just a name. It is a religion. It is a lifestyle. It is a conviction that drives us.
What really excites me is how people have kept it very simple and also played with the theme, and how each person has interpreted it in their own way.
To stay updated with all the current entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
We focus on the drought in the Western Cape and Cape Town specifically. Now, the Western Cape government last week said there is no need to panic over the declaration of the province as a disaster area. The Premier, Helen Zille, made the announcement as the province battles its worst drought since 1904, with only 11% drinkable water left. The spokesperson for Zille, Michael Mpofu, says that the disaster classification will be for a 3-month period to allow government to reprioritize funding to protect key frontline service delivery points such as hospitals and schools. Joining us now from our Cape Town Sea Point studios is the Deputy Director of Future Water, Professor Neil Armitage. Professor, a very good morning to you and welcome.
And a good morning to you too.
First and foremostly, Professor, we heard how bad the situation is in Cape Town in relation to the drought, but can you tell us what's the cause?
Well, obviously the cause is a lack of rainfall. After some very good rains that we had way back in 2012, 13, 14 even, we had one of the lowest rainfall in 2015, followed by below average rainfall in 2016. And now we're sitting at the end of May and there's still no rainfall. Ordinarily, we'd expect over 100 millimetres. We've actually got just maybe 10 or 15 millimetres. And so clearly that's had an impact on the water levels in the reservoirs.
Now, there is a notion, Professor, and I want to take you back to 2009 when a reporter asked the Western Cape at that point in time how long the city of Cape Town's water supply will last, and they said they got enough water until 2020. Is that really the case, and was there enough warning for the city at that point in time?
Look, certainly at that point in time, yes, I would have said so. First of all, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. The city itself is only one of a number of role players in the water in the Western Cape. The Western Cape water supply system is operated as a sort of team effort chaired by the Department of Water and Sanitation. And way back when our last major drought, in fact, way back as far as about 1999, there was a concern about the availability of water in the Western Cape, and that led to, in the first instance, to the construction of the Berg River Dam, but in the second instance, it led to the implementation of water conservation and water demand management procedures by the city, which has done amazing things, in fact. A lot of people are unaware of the fact that the average water use by Cape Town effectively hasn't increased in the last 18 years, which is nothing short of extraordinary. And it's been by the city relentlessly hunting down leaks, reducing pressure, looking at alternative sources of water, for example, treated sewage effluent to selected industries and golf courses and the likes of that. And as a result, they've been able to hold the water down. Now, the projections then was that that should be adequate to see us through to about 2019 or 2020. But the assumption always is that the rainfall distribution falls within the normal expected range. So what we've seen now is we've seen the worst drought in 100 years. And clearly that's going to have an impact. And the city, and of course the city is not alone in this, the surrounding municipalities, agricultural areas, have had to respond by trying to tighten up on the water use further from what they'd done before. And but the situation is such that we're still waiting for the rains.
Now, Professor, what role did population increase in the Western Cape of people that has an influx into the provinces, as well as urbanization and industrialization have on the current water crisis? Does it play any role?
No, of course it does, because it's people that generate a need for water. And in fact, since 1999, the population in Cape Town's increased by the best part of 1 million people. That is going to have an impact. And remember, it's not only about the water that people use in their homes, it's also about the water that's used in the workplace or commercial areas and the likes of that. It does have an impact. So, you could argue that had there not been that population increase, the measures that the city implemented with respect to water conservation, water demand management, would have probably reduced the total day-to-day use of water in the city by probably 20%, 30%. But because of the population increase, it hasn't taken place. And the other thing is that population in itself, although it's the prime driver, is not the main driver for water use. In fact, it's rising standard of living that's the main driver for water use. Poor people, for example, people living in formal settlements, typically only use about 20 litres per day. if you're in a middle class or upper middle class suburb, it's quite normal to use 200 litres per day, and of course that's not drinking. That's for uses such as obviously the baths, but it's the swimming pools, it's the jacuzzis, it's keeping lawns green and verdant. And those, so it's rising standard of living that in many ways is the bigger driver for water use. But it's also the greater opportunity for water savings as well. So when you look at the water restrictions and you try to interpret what's going on, in fact, what the city's urging people to do is to stop using water on non-essential uses such as watering gardens, filling up swimming pools and the like.
Now, could the current situation have been averted, do you think, Professor?
Well, you know, again, I mean, the city did, I think, the best that they could under the circumstances. Could have been averted, well, with the benefit of hindsight. Of course, you could always do better. And that we don't always have hindsight. My own view as an academic is that I think the city, and when I talk about the city, is of course it's actually the whole country, because as we saw in the earlier interview, the reminder that Joburg was in a similar situation only 6 months ago. The fact of the matter is, as a country, we have exploited our surface water resources to pretty much their limits. And we're very reliant on the rains, and if it doesn't rain, then we're in trouble. So the solution to that is to make the cities of South Africa more resilient. And the key to resilience is a number of components to that. One about is being more water sensitive, so being more careful about how we use water, but also by looking at alternative sources of water. And there are many that are not being exploited. For example, stormwater harvesting, rainwater harvesting, treated surge effluent, although there's a bit of that going on in Beaufort West now, as we heard earlier on. Groundwater is not being managed particularly well, as we could look at recharging of groundwater resources. So there are many things that could have been implemented, and I think will have to be implemented going forward to make us less reliant on a good rainy season. Now, of course, if the city had known we were going to have a 100-year drought, and we don't even know that this is the worst, it could get worse, I hope not, then the answer would have been to promote those type of measures sooner than they have. I think they're going to start rolling them out quite quickly. The problem is, like a lot of these things, it comes down to how you as a nation or how you as a city invest your money. I mean, do you put it into augmenting your water supply when the sort of general analysis indicates you probably don't need it, or do you put it into transportation systems or building houses for the poor or free tertiary education or whatever of the many pressing social and economic needs of the country? So it is a bit of a trade-off. It is and at the time, in 2009, it looked as though we should be all right. And we're just a little bit unfortunate. The droughts caught us at the end of what seemed to be the safe period before some of these additional measures have been implemented fully. Although having said that, as I mentioned already, the city has been incredibly successful with its pressure reduction measures. It's been quite successful in providing treated surge effluent to selected users. But it needs to ramp up those measures even more than they have already. And I think that's what you're going to see in the next year or two.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and joining us.
Thank you.
That was the Deputy Director of Future Water, Professor Neil Armitage, from our Sea Point studios, talking to us about the drought and the measures that they need to put in place in order to avert a situation like that in future.
No, Elvis hasn't made a miraculous return. That was a recorded interview. Of course, this drought's been ongoing for, well, months and months and months and months, years, some would say. Now, Level 4 water restrictions, say the City of Cape Town, they've now urged residents to keep to that emergency supply of water, as supply interruptions may occur in the coming weeks, even if it rains tomorrow, Cape Town. This follows the implementation of that Level 4 restrictions. Last week, it was June the 1st, of course, that the restrictions came into being. It allowed residents to use only water for essential washing, drinking and cooking. And look on screen there. You can, 8-minute shower. That's it. That's 100 litres. Drinking water and cooking. 10 washing the hands and face. 5. 3 toilet flushes, that's 100 litres. Washing dishes in an energy-efficient dishwasher every 2 days. And washing your clothes. Well, you should wash your clothes less, I'm told. Pick it up, fold it up, and put it back in your cupboard. Unless, of course, it's very dirty or smells really bad. Now, let's take a look at the front pages from around the world. We'll start in Europe, where the Times reports that one of the London Bridge attackers was free to carry out the atrocity despite working for a man accused of helping to train the July 7 bombing ringleader and being under investigation by police and MI5 there. Then, across the pond in New York, the Wall Street Journal says police say that the 27-year-old Khurram Shahzad Butt was known to security services, and neighbors said his zeal for Islamic extremism was broadcast last year in a television documentary called The Jihadis Next Door. Finally, in Israel, the Jerusalem Post says that the 27-year-old man, Mohammed Taha, was killed during an incident involving security forces and demonstrators in the Arab-Israeli city of Kfar Qasim. On our Facebook page, you can get the following stories that's happening, well, that's in the news here in South Africa. The Walks, they've confirmed that they've opened an inquiry into the thousands of leaked emails involving alleged improper dealings between the Gupta family and the government. Disaster risk management teams and emergency services in the Western Cape have been placed on full alert now, as a cold front is expected to make landfall there tonight. Finally, Parliament is expected to wind down the process of passing the budget this week. A long session is also expected later today as the National Assembly plenary convenes from 10 o'clock this morning to consider several pieces of legislation and reports of committees. All of that on our Facebook page. Of course, what will happen in Parliament you can get on that channel. Now, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk to Gift to the Givers, because they've deployed themselves in the Cape to try and help with disaster management and relief effort that's underway there. I can tell you, you might see the city is raining, but in the little dorpies around the Cape, it is a real crisis. Don't miss that.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant. A life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Multiple League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Yeah, rain is on its way to Cape Town, they say tonight. And therein lies the irony. Disaster relief organisation Gift to the Givers will be sending several thousand litres of bottled water to assist the drought-stricken Western Cape province. The organisation is also awaiting a geologist's report to drill 4 boreholes in an initial intervention there Now, joining us to talk about this is Mr. Badr Kazi. He's the Corporate Liaison Manager at the Gift of the Givers. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Thank you for having us on.
It's always great to have you guys with us because you do such fantastic work. But tell me about this bottled water distribution. Are you targeting the sort of dorpies, the smaller towns that are in a bit of trouble?
No, absolutely. We're meeting disaster management of the Western Cape on Thursday. And there we're going to work out the most vulnerable areas. Now, we understand they are in Drought and the West Coast municipality.
Yeah.
What we like to do in cases like this is do sort of homes for the disabled and homes for the elderly. So we work with the most vulnerable in the community. So we're going to work from there. And together with Professor Groenewald, who's our consultant on the drought, we're looking at sort of drilling at least 4 boreholes rather in the Western Cape. But I can only sort of confirm where it will be once we meet disaster management on Thursday.
Yeah, so that sort of plan's got to be discussed a little bit.
Absolutely.
But the situation on the ground, just give us an idea. How difficult is it for people? I don't think we connect with what is really happening in the day-to-day lives of people.
No. Look, as you pointed out quite correctly earlier, Gauteng, KwaZulu and Free State, less than a few months ago in a similar position.
Yeah.
And when I went on a site visit last week to all our boreholes in these areas, sort of people had sort of forgotten there was a drought, a couple of months ago. So that's just the nature of people. I mean, you got to live, and you can't really dwell too far back in the past. And what we found that the boreholes that we set up in Kwakwa, in Senekal, in KwaZulu, has helped sort of stabilize the community. I mean, not only people, but there are animals too. Without animals, I mean, we need to look after our livestock and animals. So we're going to do sort of a similar intervention in the Western Cape, And when I was in Hopefield and that a couple of days ago, there was a sort of, people were very, very concerned. And we must always remember that our sort of rural brothers and sisters normally get left behind in these type of things. We're all worried about the big metropoles, but these sort of peri-urban areas always get sort of left out. So that's where we'll be concentrating our efforts.
What about places like the Northern Cape, for instance? I've heard towns like Kalfinia are completely dry, the dam's completely dry, and they're really preparing themselves for a tough couple of years to come.
I salute the Northern Cape people because they're hardy stock. I mean, I think us city people would have been complaining a long time ago. They've sort of, they're used to working with very little water. I mean, their whole lifestyle is sort of frugal when it comes to water. We've sort of intervened in those areas. But, the Northern Cape is huge and it's sparse, and we've sort of set up boreholes in 2 major areas, in Komaggas and in Springbok. And from there, we've got water tankers sort of going to the absolute rural areas and isolated areas.
Let's go back to the Western Cape. The aquifers and that kind of thing. Is there a lot of underground water in the Western Cape that can be mined, for lack of better English?
Well, I'm going to be shot down, but our geologist feels there is enough water to sort of, till the big rains come, which will be probably in 5 years' time, according to his estimates. There's enough water to sort of controlled water usage would sort of take us out of a very prickly situation.
How do we get to mention the big city folk, how do we get this change of mindset towards being a bit more frugal with water, as we see in the Northern Cape, rather?
It's very, very difficult. I mean, it's a different society, a different mindset, and I think people only react to a crisis. And I was just listening to the professor earlier. We must not sort of forget the impact of tourism in the Western Cape. I mean, I think that has a lot of pressure on water, and especially with the hotels and developments springing up in the Western Cape. I think that's where people need to look at also, is what, usage of water.
I think it's something like 30,000 people influx per month now into the sort of Cape Metropole, and that also drains the resources for sure.
Yeah, I think we should not make, for example, economic migrants, we should not victimize them. Because,
scapegoat them.
Absolutely. I think the problem, in our opinion, and our sort of case studies show that we need to look at the situation in the actual urban areas, not really in the peri-urban areas.
In conclusion, people want to get involved with you now, want to send you some water or bottled water or any kind of help that they can. How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, please go on www.giftofthegivers.org, and on our website sort of explains people everything, and we'll sort of have a program where water can be delivered if they wish to donate.
Mr. Badr Kazi, I thank you very much for joining us, and you guys are doing fantastic work in dealing with the most vulnerable. Yes, it's old age homes and schools and toddlers, and those are the ones, people that are most at risk. And this is what Gift of the Givers are doing. They're helping those, and you can help them. Go to the website. As you heard, Mr. Badr Kazi is the corporate liaison manager at the Gift of the Givers, and he joined us today to talk about drought, not just in the Western Cape, but all around the areas that are at risk. A couple of months ago, as he pointed out, here in Gauteng and northern parts of the country, we were staring down exactly the same barrel. Anyhow, there are also other issues in South Africa, and we've been asking you about this. What's been happening in the schools? What has been happening in the schools? Is there still a problem with racism in our schools? Is there a problem with religious intolerance in our schools? We've seen, of course, the headscarf kind of ban, and we use the K word being used. 63 votes only today. 87% are saying, yes, there is still a problem with racism in our schools. That's an overwhelming majority. Do we have tweets on this? Okay, there we go. On Teret says, Newsroom, racism is still a problem and it will continue to be that way. And now there's religious division we have to deal with now. Yep, we all have to deal with this. I agree. Barry Martin says, we as parents should not allow our children to learn about racism in our schools because education is the key for the future. Thank you, Barry. Luvo says, institutionalized racism. Yes, it might not be pupils, but teachers. SGBs can be racist, and this manifests in many ways. The hair incident in Pretoria is one. Luvo, that is a great tweet, my friend. I agree. Sometimes the way that schools are set up through the SGBs creates those divides. I see it at my son's school, and he happens to be at Northcliff High. For instance, they're not allowed to take a soccer ball to school on the school grounds. That, for me, is just too much. I've spoken to Mr. Essex Clark about it, and they say, well, it's a safety issue anyhow. Let's move on. The recent spate of terror attacks in Europe throws up an interesting but necessary question. Should all international sporting events in affected countries like England and France, even Germany, should it be cancelled? That's our question, our sports question today. And Kendall is here. And Kendall, I know you have strong views on this.
No, I've got very strong views, as well as a few others that I've been speaking to. One looks at the history of sports and terror attacks. We look at what's happened in Sri Lanka in the past, what's happened with Pakistan. The cricket team has not played at home. They now call the UAE home because of terror attacks in Pakistan. We know that the Australian cricket team refused point blank to tour Zimbabwe just recently because they were afraid for their security.
It becomes a political, almost a political plaything a little bit, this threat of terror attacks. Whenever before Australians come to Zimbabwe, there's always a question mark over the country, posed over the country. Even in South Africa, 2010 World Cup, we had similar issues. Why is there no cricket in Pakistan, but cricket continues in England?
That's the big question, because we're looking right now. We've got pictures coming through from Manchester as well as London that our viewers are looking at right now. And the big question is, why do we carry on with everything? We had that attack in Munich recently, the attack in Paris. We've got the French Open currently happening, and no questions have been asked really about the safety of not just the playing teams, but the safety of the hordes of fans and spectators.
Especially the fans that are at risk, because these attacks are on the streets, knife attacks on the streets, people being run over and so forth. So it's a direct threat to fans traveling there. Guys, you're tweeting us. What are they telling us? What are you guys saying with regards to the story? It's not politicized for the sake of politicizing.
The reality is, as Katlego says, it's bad, especially after so much preparations. The tournament has to be called off. People's lives are in danger. We can't risk, and these terrorists are heartless.
That's on point, Katlego. Colin Mabuza says, yes, the British government security has failed within a month. 2 terror attacks. You can't say that to them directly, though. They say, oh, it's so difficult, this thing. But when the boot is on the other foot, the English team are called back. Or the English team have to send an advance party to go investigate India, whether it's safe in India.
Absolutely.
And so forth. I don't know, but some say it's borderline borderline bigotry with regards to this.
Well, I mean, here's another one to throw into the mix for everybody. Just yesterday and this morning in Melbourne, a gunman was shot who was shouting slogans in support of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And, this is in Melbourne, Australia, the heartland of Australia itself. So what's being said about that, and how does it affect any international sporting events that are happening in any of these cities that we've just spoken about?
Yeah, it's a simple truth, and that is, if you don't want it to be cancelled in your country, because now Europe, the mainland, the continent is being affected. Now suddenly the talk is a little bit different. We have to stand up and show that we fight against these. They won't change our way of life and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But in South Africa, if it had to happen here...
Oh, yeah, no, there'd be hullabaloo. It will be all over the news, it will be on the wires, and there'll be talk about how unsafe South Africa is. And you mentioned it just before 2010, we had all sorts of advisories coming in about the country from all over the place to everyone from the West, from Australia, about how unsafe South Africa could be.
And we had the very best World Cup in human history right here. They hated the Vuvuzelas, though. Anyhow, we're going to be back with you at the top of the hour. Don't forget to tweet Kendall, because he'll read your tweets once again at 10:40 with regards to that Champions Trophy. Should it be called off? Because there's a direct threat to people on the streets in London and elsewhere in the UK. We'll be back at 10.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Africa is getting more and more digitized, and people have to navigate through an increasingly connected world.
I did a call my bay over here.
At school, I use my Wi-Fi. On Network, we tell you about Africa's technology and social media landscape.
Politicians already do use Twitter a lot.
It's both Android and iOS compatible.
A solar-charged box that includes everything, the computer, the projector.
That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Water and sanitation underpin health, education, and livelihoods, yet hundreds of millions of people live without these basic human rights. In many countries around the world, taps, wells, and pipes simply don't exist, and even where they do, they are often not affordable to poor communities. Over 650 million people don't have access to safe drinking water. This is roughly 1 in 10 people of the world population. As you may have guessed, these are people living in developing countries. Even more shocking is that 2.3 billion people don't have access to adequate bathroom facilities. That translates to roughly 1 in 3 of the world's population. The consequences from this lack of proper sanitation leads to water pollution, increased vulnerability to diseases, and children missing numerous crucial schooling hours, amongst others. In many countries, children of schooling age spend countless hours walking unsafe routes to collect drinking water. And in most cases, the water is not even safe. About 860 children die every day from diarrhea caused by drinking unsafe, polluted water. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Welcome back. Yes, 10 o'clock Central African time. Myself and Kendall are going to try and bring you the best from the world of news and sport for the next couple of hours. Kendall, we're focusing on child killings in South Africa, and there must be something going on.
There must be
Psychosis,
something bigger. Yeah.
Drugs, something.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of it together.
Something bigger than what we just see that meets the eye, because it can't be that one week we're talking about women being kidnapped and killed, and then the very next week we're talking about the same thing happening to children.
Yep. So what are we missing is the question we ask you. What are we missing with regards to child murders here in South Africa? Because it feels like we are not looking at something. Maybe we're not looking at the drug problem that's escalating. Maybe we're not looking at untreated mental illness on our streets. Maybe we're not looking at these kinds of things, and we should be looking at it. But people are tweeting us, Kendall.
Yeah, now let's look at what our viewers are saying. Mystic Man Malachi says those cold-blooded, vicious need specialized units, specifically women and child murders. I'll be the first to join that force.
Mr. Malachi, fight fire with fire, he says. Brigo Brick says, when Malema go to the courts, there's an army of police. We need visible police in our locations. More of them, says Brigo Bricks. Yeah, some say even the military must go into the townships.
It's almost that dire. Theo says psychos and criminals are gaining confidence simply because of political instability and incompetence.
Yeah, that's firm but fair. Kadlejo says, we don't seem to confront the real reasons for these brutal killings. Why would a grown man kill a child and drink the blood? There must be a real reason. Yes, is it Satanism that we are missing? Could be even that, you know. Is it a confluence of all of these?
Yeah, Judy Kennedy says lack of resources for affordable daycares and lack of information for the parents on how to educate and inform the children.
Yep, daycare is one of that, but that's dealing with the symptoms. We need to find the root that makes it okay to behave like this.
Even it has been said in the past that we are a nation and society in trauma that has not been dealt with, and we all know how post-traumatic stress disorders, how they manifest themselves, and this could be one of them.
In different ways. And some say the next question, the poll we're running, is linked to it, because racism and religious intolerance and all this kind of things is part of that trauma we're still suffering from, Kendall, and it manifests itself in our schools quite a lot.
Absolutely, and that's why we have to ask you this question today. Is racism still a problem in our schools?
We see in Pietermaritzburg the K word was being used, but there have been a couple of incidents in the schools. Yep. And then there's the one of needing a pass in order to wear a headscarf during Ramadan, at Northcliff High. And my son is at Northcliff High. I know, Mr. Essex Clark, you've got problems at your school, sir, because you don't allow soccer balls into the school grounds as well.
Yeah, now 89% of our viewers are saying definitely racism is still a problem in our schools. Mystic Man Malachi weighs in on this topic as well, says charity begins at home. Monkeys, monkey see, monkey do. Our parents, let's teach our young ones Ubuntu, that's humanity, and love doesn't cost a thing.
Doesn't cost a thing, that's for sure. Teboho Kumpop, who says racism is a product of society's lack of moral efficiency. Moral efficiency, I think.
Yes, and Ikonanazo, yes, even recognized you a little earlier. Racism is a disease that circulates through in an insecure person's mind. It's a weakness that has become an inheritance for children.
Yeah, we have to break that cycle, though, Ikonanazo. That's what we have to fight. Tamba Danzel Sibia says racism is not a problem. The problem is that some people refuse to change their barbaric minds, says Mr. Danzel. Yep.
And we've got another one coming in from Ben Hur. School racism. Government should do more to associate young girls and boys of all races, religions, tribes through provinces and inculcate similar norms and culture.
Similar norms and culture. Interesting takes. You guys are doing great work tweeting us. Fantastic. Kendall, we're also asking sports question on screen, and it's a simple one. Should this tournament be called off because the safety of people are at risk?
Yeah, definitely want to know from our viewers. What do you think? I mean, in London we've had a terror attack, in Manchester as well. We also have the South African cricket team, the national cricket teams from all over the world, 8 of the best, they're all there. Should the ICC Champions Trophy be cancelled because of the spate of recent terror attacks in England?
Tweet us on this terror, on the terror alerts in London, and whether the tournament should be called off, and then you tell us, and Kendall will put it forward just before we go to sport at 10:40. All of your tweets on this. We've already got quite a few in, but time now for us to take a look at the top stories at this hour. A statement in which Lesotho Deputy Prime Minister Motshekga Metsing tells his supporters that they have to protect the army because it helped them into power is trending and attracting many questions. There may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings in Gauteng after the identikits of 2 suspects in the murder case of a 9-year-old boy from Johannesburg was released. And the principal of Northcliff High in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark, has spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offense caused to Muslim learners and their families. Those are your top stories. I'll give you an update on all of them shortly, but let's go over to Kendall to give you the sports headlines.
Ewan, thank you very much for that. This is what we've got for you in the sports. To you, good morning.
He's got all the qualities, all of the qualities that you want from your captain.
Bafana Bafana coach Stuart Baxter makes no bones about making Thulanisa Trial his captain.
Hopefully we can get off to a good start, get out of the blocks. Is that what this team actually needs at this point in time? Just a little bit of confidence.
And ahead of the crucial test season opener against France, Alistair Coutier is hopeful and slightly optimistic for a win on the weekend.
Murray, the #1 player in the world, comes through with flying colours today.
Andy Murray is back to his best as he thrashes Karen Khachanov in straight sets to storm into the French Open quarterfinals. All this in more detail I've got for you at 10:40. Do stay with Evan because he's got the news.
Well, our top story is around what could be a looming crisis in Lesotho now. A statement made by the country's Deputy Prime Minister, Motshekga Metsing, urging his supporters to protect the army because it helped them into power, is trending and raising a lot of questions. Now, speaking at an impromptu gathering at his party's headquarters in Maseru, Metsing admitted they didn't perform as well as they had hoped in the elections, presumably referring to an election pact he went into with Prime Minister Pagalita Mosisili.
He says they have to talk to other parties, even those that were their enemies. He says the army put its head on the block for them to be in power now. They can't let Thabani win. They have to protect them.
Now, the Deputy Prime Minister had early on made a commitment that all parties will accept the results of the election. He spoke to our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena.
If you consider the climate now in Lesotho is peaceful, and I agree with these elections, and we are hoping all the leadership is going to accept the outcome of the elections. But what is important is that there is peace now in the country. And SADC has done so much. We commend SADC. We are grateful of the support that we are continuously receiving from SADC. But we need not say that, as you are suggesting, that we must move with speed. No, this is a Basotho program. We need to ensure that these reforms are actually beneficial to this country. After these reforms, we need to be saying that no good foundation has been laid, and we are sure that the country will never, ever engage in these sorts of political instability that we have gone through.
Well, let's go there now and find out what's the latest in Lesotho. We are joined on the line by SABC reporter Ntakwana Ngatane, who's been in Lesotho for the election process. Very good morning to you, Ntakwana.
Good morning, Eben.
The latest murmurings that we're seeing, is this a sign that tensions are building in Lesotho ahead of the official announcements of the polls?
Well, Eben, what I can say is that probably the Deputy Prime Minister was not aware that what he was saying would cause so much traction, because the opposition is reading a lot more into the statement than what probably he intended. And when we had a conversation with his spokesperson this morning, and that is the spokesperson of the Lesotho Congress for Democracy, Debo Sekata, he says to us what the Deputy Prime Minister meant in that statement was that in 2014, August 30th. Now, this is a date that is remembered by all in Lesotho because the army surrounded police stations and said it was disarming elements in the police force. And subsequently, Prime Minister Tom Thabane said that it was an attempted coup by then Army Commander Tladi Modi, but the army said it was disarming police after it learned that there were elements in the police who were intending to massacre Congress supporters who were going to march. And Sekata says Metsing is referring to that incident in which he says if the army had not come to their defense then, they would not be alive as Congress leaders and supporters, and therefore they would not have taken over government. But because of the events of this weekend, Eben, it is difficult to not associate the behavior of the army and its deployment at polling stations with the fact that the government probably does not want to give up power. And now the statement, which is now being misconstrued or construed by the opposition to mean that the army should not allow Thabane to take over. So a lot of connotations around the statement. Metsing has not yet explained what he meant, but this is what Sekata says, his spokesperson. Eben?
The results of the election, when can we expect those?
Those, I believe we can expect by midday today. The Independent Electoral Commission is supposed to open now at 10 o'clock, and we have 8 constituencies remaining out of 80, and the other 69 were announced in the last 2-3 days. But 3 constituencies, there were candidates who had passed on, so they will not be announced. Only the votes from them will be announced. So we expect in the next 2 or 3 hours, they will then allocate 40 seats of proportional representation, following which then they will make the final announcement. Eben?
And the observer missions, just to wrap up, what do the observer missions, there are a couple in the country, what do they say about the conduct thus far?
They yesterday said that the elections were reasonably free, fair, and credible, that the atmosphere was peaceful, but they were concerned about the deployment of the army. This issue doesn't seem to sit down even. They were concerned about the deployment of the army and the lack of clarity between the role of the army and the police, and they were saying that the Constitution must specify who the commander-in-chief of the army is, but also get the army out of the role of preventing crime and maintaining law and order, because that is an area that the police are also supposed to be in, and it seems to cause problems in areas like the elections, for instance. Eben?
Thank you very much for that update. That's Ntakwana Gatane. She is, live from Rusuru. That was on the line, and of course she says today will be a key day to see whether stability will finally return to the Mountain Kingdom. Back home, of course, there's some good news. There may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings here in Gauteng. Now, identities of 2 people suspected of kidnapping and then killing a 9-year-old boy from Orange Farm, south of Johannesburg, they've now been released. Keketso Matlakwane was snatched outside his Lenasia school on May 16th and his body found 3 days later. Police are now widening the scope of the investigation to see if the suspects can be linked to other cases of abduction.
A senseless killing. Little Keketso kidnapped by 3 occupants of a combi and his body found here with multiple stab wounds. Now police believe they are close to arrests. These, 2 of the 3 suspected killers.
There were 3 people who were in the Kumbi, 1 female and 2 males. So far, we are trying to get the person who can assist us with the other ID kit. And we will make sure that we interlink with the other cases and see if these suspects who were involved in the kidnapping of the boy were not linked to other cases.
The statistics indicate a war on children like Keketso. While the boy's family is still demanding answers, an impassioned plea.
I would like to call to all the people at large, the community, to assist the police into finding the perpetrators, because of already there's 2 people who have been positively identified, and we just need closure.
The Mahlakwanas hope that the brutal death of their son will be the last. Griselda Lewis, SABC News in Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, learners and teachers from Cedar High School in Rocklands in Mitchell's Plain in the Western Cape, they're expected to embark on a march against violence against women and children this morning. Now, organisers of the march say violence affects everyone in their communities. The march follows a number of recent incidents in Cape Town in which children were reported missing and were then later found dead. In most cases, they were killed by people known to them. It's reported that 20 children now have been killed in the Western Cape since January of this year. And that's why we're asking you our question today. What are we missing with regards to these child murders here in South Africa? We see them all around the country. Horrific killings of young children, and quite often it seems just for pleasure. You guys are tweeting us on this question because it affects all of us. Let's have a look at these tweets. Mzukisi says people must be active in the lives of their children and warn them not to talk to strangers. Promote the neighborhood watches as well, he says. Anele says, being in prison is better than staying in poverty. You kill, you have 3 meals a day. You don't kill, you won't have a meal, says Anele. Wow, that's incredible to think about. Alexandra says, increased support for and creation of social responsibility organizations within communities, government. Wake up, says Alexandra. Yeah, those are your tweets. Now, police have confirmed they're now investigating the murder of Escom employee Tembisi Yende. Post-mortem results have shown that Yende suffered head injuries and bruises to her neck before she died. Yende was reported missing last month and was found 10 days later in a locked office at the power utilities substation in Springs on Gauteng's East Rand. She was laid to rest last week Saturday, with the family still demanding answers to the mysterious circumstances surrounding her death. Police are appealing to anyone with information to assist with this investigation. Now, the other one that's featuring prominently is the principal of Northcliff High in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark. He's spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offense caused to Muslim learners and their families. The issue arose when an upset parent took to social media, questioning why her daughter had to carry a special card stating that she had been granted permission to wear a headscarf for religious purposes. While Essex Clark did apologize, he added that concession cards had been implemented years ago and did not apply to Muslim learners only.
We given them this concession card so that any teacher querying their different attire can see that their uniform is legitimate and done with the full permission of the school's management. The idea has been, the last 2 that I gave out were for 2 boys who were in our major production that wanted to grow their hair longer for the roles that they were playing on the stage. Those are the last 2 that I signed.
Meanwhile, South Africans from across the country have taken to social media to express their disgust as an audio clip of a Pietermaritzburg girls' high school student using the K word to describe black students trended. We decided not to put forward this clip, but we're asking you about racism and intolerance in general in our schools. Is it still a problem, racism? when you see these kinds of incidents. 82 votes in, 89% of yes saying, an overwhelming majority saying, yes, racism is still a problem. Now we move abroad. Qatar is calling for talks to end a major diplomatic row, which has seen Saudi Arabia and several other neighboring countries cut links with the Gulf state. The foreign ministry says all sides should sit down and resolve all their differences through dialogue. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has also spoken with the leaders of Qatar, Russia, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to lower the tension in the region. Meanwhile, earlier in our Pretoria studios, we were joined by Professor Iqbal Jabbai, an international relations and Islamic specialist at UNISA, and this is what he had to say. We don't have that clip, unfortunately. We'll try and get that clip for you a little bit later in the show. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, well, we're looking at Youth Month and youth unemployment in particular.
It is 6 p.m. Central African Time, broadcasting live from Johannesburg. This is Primetime News.
South Africa said farewell to one of the Rivonia trialists, Uncle Cappy, a fearless stalwart.
With this man who was so engaged, so busy, so witty, so funny, so wise, and so incredibly principled.
Joseph Shabalala has been honored for his contribution to the South African music industry. A statue in his honor was unveiled during an annual gala dinner in Ladysmith.
The shot of the day, however, belonged to American Daniel Berger, who chipped in for an eagle on the par 4 fifth hole.
For all your news updates, stay on Primetime News every Saturday and Sunday from 6 p.m.
From the moment you start your day. Good morning, everybody. It is 6 o'clock.
We are there for you.
You want a guarantee from the leadership that we should not be leaders who will steal. I'm prepared to give that guarantee that we should not steal from our people.
We bring your morning into perspective.
This is the reason they keep putting fees up. They're not getting enough money.
We'll make sure that you get the full story. The police officers from specifically Moffat View Police Station, they support these brothels. What have you found upon your investigations on this matter?
I cannot deny those allegations.
And you can count on the weather team with expertise.
Join us live at 6 a.m. daily.
Welcome back. A staggering 49% of South Africa's 14.6 million unemployed people are aged between 15 and 35. Corporate South Africa says unemployed youth are wasted assets, and it wants to change this, with the help of government, of course. Business leaders were shocked by the unemployment statistics released last week by Stats SA. To talk to us about youth unemployment, well, we are joined by Professor Lauren Graham from the Centre for Social Development in Africa here at the Johannesburg University. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, and thanks for having me on the show.
The numbers don't lie, do they?
No, they don't. We're sitting at just under half of young people aged 15 to 34 are unemployed. If we look at an age disaggregate of that, 15 to 24-year-olds, that's up to 66%. Slightly lower for your 25 to 34-year-olds. And even more worrying is the number of young people who are not in education, employment or training. So there, if we're looking at 20 to 24-year-olds, which is really the period where we expect young people to be starting their entry into the labour market, again, just under half of young people are neither in training nor in employment.
They're completely on the outside. Is that kind of a lost generation? And what do we see? What's the effects of that lost generation?
Well, we do a lot of qualitative work with these young people. They hate being called a lost generation. They'll tell us over and over again, we're not lost. We have dreams, we have ambitions, we've got things to offer. But they are marginalized, they are excluded, they are on the margins of society, and we have to figure out ways of bringing them back in.
Well, what are they? I mean, you know, apart from the obvious 5% growth annually in our economy, we're not getting that, and we're not going to get that for the foreseeable future. So we've got a little conundrum to overcome. What are the smart people telling us?
Well, as you say, the elephant in the room is this economic growth, but it's not just economic growth. It's inclusive economic growth, which means that it has to come with jobs.
Yeah.
And we've seen job losses in the primary and secondary sectors. And our economic growth path is one that prioritizes a high-tech growth path, which requires higher levels of skills. That hasn't been matched by investments in education, both at the primary level, although there's been heavy monetary investment, that hasn't resulted in the quality education we need to match that growth path. And we also need wider access to particularly our TVET colleges. Those are the two big elephants in the room. In the meantime, there are a number of interventions. So we have the employment tax incentive, and that at the moment is showing mixed results. At the aggregate level, we're not seeing too many positive effects. But when we look at the small business, at the types of businesses, small businesses seem to be taking it up and creating jobs for young people. And that's where the bulk of employed young people are working, is in small businesses. So that's a positive. We also see incredible work with youth employability organizations, from Love Life to Harambe, who help young people to transition into the labor market. They're fantastic. They're not yet reaching the numbers of young people we need them to reach, so we need to be investing in organizations like that.
How's it affecting these young people, both mentally and then in sort of their outlook as young people? What's happening to them?
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So we still see that young people have very positive sense of future and high aspirations for themselves despite the situations they find themselves in. So that's a positive and something we should be building on.
Yeah.
But we do see that despite high levels of youth unemployment and large numbers of young people in communities being unemployed, they continue to feel marginalized and excluded.
Yeah.
It creates a lot of tension in the family. If they're borrowing money to go and look for work and they can't pay it back, that creates tension in the family. And particularly for young men, where masculinity is so tied to that provider role, it undermines their sense of self.
Yeah, absolutely. And some would argue that lots of social ills are what we see because of it. But I don't want to go there. I'm a little bit tired of that. I'd like to talk about how do we fix this. And quite often we are told, oh, government must create jobs. But governments don't create jobs. Business create jobs.
Absolutely.
Business, are they on side?
Well, the CEO initiative that you referenced earlier is a key intervention that is aiming to get 1 million young people into learnerships. Now, that's a really positive step, but we need to be thinking beyond learnerships. Where do they go once they've completed that year? And that means we have to be creating jobs and making an economic situation that is friendly to creating jobs, particularly amongst small businesses, which do seem to be more able to absorb young people.
You're the expert. Is this fight against unemployment, youth unemployment especially, is it winnable?
I wouldn't be working in this area if I didn't think it was, and I think that there are a number of positives. We've recently done a study where we've looked at the number of interventions from both business and government and civil society, and there's been enormous interventions, enormous resources spent on the issue. So there's definitely will and resources there. We have to figure out how to integrate those better, articulate them better, and ensure they reach a wider number of young people.
Youth Month is what it's now, and we'll have Youth Day, and we know we celebrate that every year. Do these kinds of initiatives, do they add any value, or should we rethink our strategies around interventions, in particular in South Africa?
So I think the awareness is a good thing. Having a youth month where we focus on these issues is key, but it can't just be 1 month. And certainly an event or expenditure on some big concert is not going to solve the problems. We need to go to the crux of what are our policies telling us. We have really good policies in place. How do we make sure that those are implemented well and that higher numbers of young people are reached across the year?
You mentioned a little bit earlier, and that's kind of grabbed me, is that small business and maybe smaller medium businesses are really the ones that are creating the opportunities for young people. But we live in a country where monopolies rule our economy. We're dead.
Yeah, that is a major concern. And the other major concern is that it's your small and medium enterprises that are often not equipped to deal with the human resources, the training, everything that goes hand in hand with bringing young people on board. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, although we've seen some positive results with their uptake of the employment tax incentive, that could probably be a lot better if it was really easy to administer and if they didn't need the bureaucracy and the human resource capacity to make it happen.
Why is it so tough for small businesses to survive in South Africa? Maybe I've answered that question already. Let's stop there. Give me your message to young people who are out there maybe feeling a bit despondent, to business and CEOs who are out there feeling a little bit despondent, and then to officials in government and the like who are trying year upon year with these kind of interventions, but it seems as if the problem gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah. So I think my primary message would be to businesses to say, don't discount young people. They are passionate, they're optimistic, they want to learn, they want to make a contribution. Don't see them as lazy and sitting on the side of the road. Give somebody a chance. To young people who are feeling down about everything, try and find a local organization that can help you. Love Life is one, Harambe is another, Africa Tikkun, all of them are local organizations, easily accessible to young people who can help you figure out how to get into the labor market.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us hope. Professor Lauren Graham from the Centre for Social Development in Africa at the University of Johannesburg says, yes, we all have to stay positive and keep plugging away at the problem. And for big business, maybe they should give small business more of a chance here in South Africa. Anyhow, we're going to take a short commercial break. You're watching the Newsroom show. When we come back, I'll do an interesting book. It's called The Third Reel, and I'll speak to the author shortly. Don't miss that.
President Jacob Zuma says that the country's security agencies will seek new and more effective ways to fight crime.
Crime, as you would appreciate, depends on the circumstances. This narrative that South Africans are xenophobic, we don't necessarily agree with it.
This group of Bangladeshi shop owners ooze frustration. They've lost everything.
I'm like totally destroyed. I can't see what I'll do, where I'll go.
Rescue workers are still searching for the body of a 5-year-old boy who fell into an old mine shaft near Boksburg in Ekurhuleni.
Tensions remain high, with thousands of community members refusing to clear the scene until the boy is found.
Welcome back. The Third Reel tells the story of a 22-year-old Etienne Nivert, a film student in London. Now, having fled South Africa in 1986, yes, at the time of Thatcher and the anti-apartheid campaigns, when he then starts a relationship with a German expat Axel, who starts to become obsessed by a lost film made in Berlin in the early 1930s. Now, his quest to find the film will take him to East and then West Berlin. At that stage, of course, Berlin was still divided by the wall. To talk to us about this book, well, we are joined in studio by the author, S.J. Nudea. Very good morning to you, S.J. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Evan.
The third reel is interesting only for, I think, those who kind of film buffs who really know that films used to be made on 3 reels, and the third reel is the third reel in this case.
Indeed. Yes, there was, in the 20s and the 30s, film was seen as fleeting entertainment, and no one really thought of archiving and preserving films. So there's a whole catalogue of films that we know were there, or of which certain fragments might remain, or perhaps just promotional posters, but which are indeed lost. And so this book took that as one of its premises.
Now, Etienne, who's the key character, Etienne Nieuwenhuis, becomes obsessed by a lost film made in Berlin in the 1930s. Without giving too much away, what was it about the film that he found so captivating?
So the film itself is it's a fictional film, one that I've devised for this book. It's based on a book by a Jewish German intellectual from the 1930s, in which he describes in short essays or in short pieces the Berlin of his childhood in 1900, which quite poignantly he knew at the time would be, or had a good inkling would be destroyed, as he was writing this in the early Nazi era, in the early 30s. So it's quite complicated why he gets interested in this. In part, he's also his lover, Axel, also leaves for Berlin while they're both living in London. Axel also goes missing. He just disappears. And then Etienne goes on this rather labyrinthine search for both this film and for Axel, and it takes him to, it exposes him to all kinds of dangers and risks and interesting scenarios in both East and West Berlin.
The sort of backstory of it also is maybe that during that search is the search of self and finding meaning and identity in a way.
Sure. He's a character who's finding himself in between apartheid-era South Africa, from which he's escaped. He's from the then conservative city of Pretoria. He finds himself in between, as I say, apartheid South Africa, Thatcherite Britain, which was quite an oppressive place in itself, and then this furnace of geopolitics at the time that was Berlin, and specifically also East Berlin with its own
Nazi Germany, of course.
Indeed. So the backstory is Nazi Germany, and the current story is 1980s East Berlin, amongst other places. So, and then these characters are the young people living in cities with these rather innocent, perhaps somewhat misplaced ideas about utopian ideas about idealism, how one can live in a city, how one can be radically free.
It's beautiful to be young and naive, isn't it?
Quite. Yes.
I want to ask you about the reception that you've had for this book in the UK thus far.
I've had it's still to be, the publication date hasn't come yet, but there have been people tend to give these so-called shouts or blurbs. So I've had a very positive, enthusiastic response from people who have read the book already. A very generous response from an American novelist by the name of Garth Greenwell, who, if I may read it myself, says it's haunting and brilliant. And those are his words, not mine.
Haunting and brilliant. I love that. Now, you're also going to make it available in Afrikaans, so you're going to extend that. Is that the way you're kind of looking?
It's already available, I think, it should be this week on the shelves in both languages, both the Afrikaans and the English. The English called, as you say, the third reel, and then the Afrikaans is called die derde spoel, as in film reel or film spoel.
Well, you've written in Afrikaans extensively. Alphabet van die Voëls was awarded several prizes, I think back in 2012, was it? Yes. Are you now shifting over, or are you kind of looking at more international exposure in this, guys?
It's kind of language is kind of a complex matter for me in some ways. I spent much of my adult life outside South Africa, And even though my first language is Afrikaans, but didn't really speak it for about 16 years, then returned to South Africa and it sort of re-emerged suddenly. And so I write in a sort of a parallel process now. The Afrikaans and English emerged somehow more or less at the same time. Or some of it is written in Afrikaans, some is in English, and then I finished 2 versions in each language, a version in each language.
I have a lot in common with you with regards to that, because my first language is Afrikaans, but I was always told that you don't speak it well enough, so you have to speak English. It's just one of those true South Africanisms.
It's a very South African thing to live in between languages, isn't it?
It is, but we can be so snobby about the languages, in certain patches. Absolutely. What's next for you? What do you want to do?
It's a difficult question. I've been writing full-time for a few years. I had the University of the Western Cape has a very generous grant for writing, which they gave to me for the writing of this novel, which allowed me to write full-time. And there's some promotional activity around this novel, and then I think I'll see what follows upon that. Writing is a tricky business.
Yeah, it's a tricky business. I'm told to write, but I'm too afraid, to be honest with you. It's just too daunting, and some people say it's just too much of an expensive luxury to have.
It's certainly it's a bit of a lonely exercise. It's you and your computer screen, or your typewriter if you're old-fashioned, and as you say, it's not a very lucrative industry. Except for 1 or 2, writers who have major numbers of international readers.
What about the kind of fraternity in South Africa and the readership that we have in South Africa? Are we still reading? Are we still interested in reading?
I should start perhaps with the writing fraternity is certainly quite a supportive and a warm, relatively small community. Yeah. And, coming back after, I was a lawyer in my previous life when I lived in New York and London.
You're looking for salvation then?
I was indeed, and I found some of it, at least. So after, being a corporate lawyer in the Northern Hemisphere, coming back to this warm little community of South African authors was quite pleasant. Readers, there's a relatively small number of enthusiastic committed readers in South Africa.
Your story sounds like the monk who sold his Ferrari a little bit.
Yes, that Ferrari is long gone.
It's long gone. SJ, fantastic to talk to you. Great story. Just pick out the book there, guys. This is a book you should be reading called The Third Rail. It's an interesting story that connects South Africa with Margaret Thatcher's Britain and Nazi Germany, I think, in a sort of way that will be really cool for you to interact and take you to those places. A great read. SJ Naudé, thank you very much for being with us. Great to have you with us here in studio. That is the author of The Third Rail. Make sure where do we get this book, by the way? All good bookshops?
It should be in all good bookshops,
okay. Yes. All good bookshops, that's what it is. Otherwise, just go on Facebook and go and harass SJ Naudé. You'll find it. His real name is Fani, actually. So, there you have it. Anyhow, the news never sleeps. Now there's a big story developing in the Middle East as Qatar has now started calling for talks to end a major diplomatic row, which has seen Saudi Arabia and several other neighboring countries there cut links with the Gulf state. The foreign ministry says all sides should sit down immediately and resolve their differences through dialogue. The Turks even jumped in. The President Tayyip Erdogan has also spoken with the leaders of Qatar, Russia, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to try and lower the tension in the region. Now, I told you earlier, we were joined in our Pretoria studios by Professor Iqbal Jabbai, and he's an international relations and Islamic specialist at UNISA, and this is what he said.
Of tensions between Qatar and its neighbors, but it has not reached this point where the neighboring Gulf states of Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Bahrain have decided to slap on Qatar road sanctions, air freight, as well as maritime ties. So the build-up is of a significant one compared to the one which happened more recently in 2014.
Yeah, but Prof, why the sudden decision to break off diplomatic ties with Qatar? I mean, we're reading now that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have recalled their diplomats from Qatar as well. And we've also seen that Qatar nationals have also been given 2 weeks to leave. What has caused all those ties to be cut off?
There seems to be some consensus amongst analysts that the recent visit of the U.S. President Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia seems to have emboldened Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, the Emirates to make an attempt to convince or blockade Qatar to review its position, at least on a number of issues. One is the fact that Qatar has an independent position on engaging with Iran, a regional power. And then also, Qatar has another position when it comes to dealing with Muslim groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is a sore bone of contention between Egypt and Qatar, as well as Saudi Arabia. And also the fact that Qatar believes that you should come up with a different foreign policy model, including a robust free press. And the Jazeera TV has always been a point of contention between Qatar and its neighbors. But it's interesting in all of this, two other Gulf states, Kuwait to the north and Oman to the south, have similar positions on question of Iran or the Muslim Brotherhood, but they've managed to sidestep these tensions. There seems to be some deeper issues which have suddenly cropped up, but there's no doubt they've been emboldened recently by the visit of President Trump and the fact that he has taken a very hostile position towards Iran, and they feel now is the time to really blockade and make this type of arrangement of a full blockade on Qatar. So we'll wait and see how this unfolds in the coming days.
We'll break away from that story to bring you the sporting news. Good morning to you. My name is Kendall Makhamate. We'll start with a story that a lot of South Africans have been waiting for. News from the Bafana Bafana camp, where coach Stuart Baxter says his team is in disarray just 5 days before the crucial Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against Nigeria on Saturday. The injury-hit Bafana Bafana have 7 doubtful players. This is in addition to the withdrawal of key midfielders Kamohelo Mokocho and Hlompo Kekana due to injury.
The national team's training camp resembles a casualty ward. 2 Cape Town City players, Lebogang Manyama and Obringoma, are carrying injuries. To make matters worse, defenders Eric Matoho and Rivaldo Kutsie are not 100% fit. Andile Jali, Tukelo Rantie and Tiani Mabunda are also nursing an assortment of injuries. Despite this, Baxter says they must soldier on.
We expect that when players are coming on camp that they are fit enough. The doc is flagging this up for me so that we can load the players in a suitable fashion moving up to the game. So the problem for me is that I have very few trainings before we meet Nigeria away from home, and I would love to have all players on the field preparing properly, not having 6 in and 6 out.
2 of the players will need the go-ahead from the medical staff if they want to make the trip to West Africa. Nigeria have been in camp in France for the past 3 weeks, having played 2 friendly matches already, but Baxter will only have 5 training sessions with the team ahead of the crucial match.
The reports that I got about Nigeria is that offensively they are very strong. Defensively, they all work very hard. They're on a good run, so they look very confident. And I think that the way that we are going to play is very, very much to try and be the biggest problem that we can be, to be the nightmare that they don't want.
Baxter has announced Wits University captain Thulani Hlachwayo as his skipper. The under-20 and under-17 national coaches, Thabo Senong and Mulifi Ntseki, will serve as the two assistants for the Nigeria match. The team leaves for Uyo on Wednesday afternoon. Sfeso Ramara, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, staying with team news, on the thorny question of who he chose as captain, Stuart Baxter had this to say about his man, Thulani Hlatshwayo.
He's got all the qualities, all of the qualities that you want from your captain. He's playing regularly and starring for his club. He's a strong character within that club's dressing room. He has experience now of national team and Africa, continental football as a whole. And I think he both leads by example and is a centre-back, which is, I also like centre-backs. I was a centre-back, so probably I'm being a little bit pompous about that, but I like centre-backs. They're in the thick of things. They usually driving forces. You know, I don't think there's anything that I could level against Tyson to say that this is not captain material.
And tragic news coming in overnight is former Ivory Coast midfielder Cheikh Diote, who's been remembered as a true professional by Newcastle manager Rafael Benitez. The 30-year-old collapsed and died in training with his Chinese club yesterday. This is confirmed by his agent. The player's agent, Emmanuel Palladino, stated that it's with deep sadness that he confirms that his client, Cheikh Diote, passed away after collapsing in training with his club, Beijing Enterprises. Diote played for English club Newcastle United for 7 years before moving to China in February. He was an African Nations Cup winner with the Ivorians in 2015, although he did miss the final through injury, and he played in 2010 as well as the 2014 World Cups. Now, Springbok coach Alistair Coetzee already under pressure to perform even before the first match against France gets underway this weekend after a string of indifferent results last year, has this to say about the upcoming weekend.
Fuse this and make sure that the balance is right. And I've always been someone that professed balance in rugby union. You cannot just run. If you just run and play too much, you make a lot of turnovers and you're behind your poles, as we've seen in Super Rugby at certain stages. You know, the right thing at the right time. You cannot also just kick. If you kick too much, then it's also not ideal. But I'm happy that the Super Rugby teams have shown the intent, the attacking intent, which is great. And all we need to do is now to get that balance right. And get that balance right, knowing what's coming, what we're facing. So hopefully we can get off to a good start, get out of the blocks. Is that what this team actually needs at this point in time? Just a little bit of confidence.
So the Springboks will kick off their test season against France in Fortress Loftus on the weekend against France. That's where we leave it with the sport. Up next, we have a look at what's happening with the weather forecast.
Well, a very good day. Let's see what's happening with the latest weather details. Well, actually starting off in the southern part, we're expecting those very cold conditions making its way in towards the central interior. But when it starts off with your seasonal forecast, we're expecting above average rainfall, but it's only a 40% chance of having those above average rainfall. This is especially important for the Western Cape as it's a winter rainfall area. That means they're about to get their rainfall. So there's a less than a 40% chance of having their rainfall above average. Into your temperatures, where we're seeing that there is a good chance of having above average temperatures, especially in the Limpopo province. Doesn't mean that we're going to get very hot conditions over this winter. It just means that there is a good chance of having warmer than normal conditions. But now, more interesting is this cold front that's making its way towards the Western Cape. We're expecting up to 80% chance of rainfall for today, while the eastern part stays clear as a high pressure cell is dominant over the east. In the wake of this cold front that's making its way, we're expecting still rainfall tomorrow over the western parts of the country, especially Cape Town and surrounding areas. Up to 80% chance of rainfall is expected. But cold, rainy weather will spread in towards the Western Cape by Thursday. And later on Friday, we're not really expecting rainfall, especially in the Gauteng area, but we are in for a very, very cold weekend over the eastern parts of the country. Well, it will be clear. Looking at your warnings, we are having a warning for high fault fire danger index, especially for the interior. Do take care, as those fire warnings might be very dangerous. We're expecting very hot, dry and windy conditions in this area as well. There's also a gale force warning for the western coastline, starting in Alexandra Bay towards Cape Agulhas in the southern parts. Your temperatures, expecting quite a cool day in places like Cape Town. Ahead of the cold front, Port Elizabeth will be very hot, dry and windy. As you can see, 30 with winds gusting at about 50 kilometers per hour. I'll leave your weather here for now. Be back with another weather update, so stay tuned to SABC News.
1.4 billion rand was raised to build the institution. Additional funding came from ordinary South Africans.
It's been heartwarming to have seen the project from 2009 when the first sorting happened to see it today being completed. Indeed, this is going to be our benchmark going forward. It's just been incredible.
Jammeh has said in the past that only Allah can remove him from office, and once claimed he would rule the tiny riverside West African nation for 1 billion years.
We are going to win this election.
Even if we avoid a downgrade, we're still hovering very dangerously close to junk, and that'll of course affect markets next year.
Our markets are actually already punishing us for a downgrade that may or may not come.
Woods made a blistering start but eventually slumped to a 1 over par 73 and is 9 shots behind the leader and his compatriot JB Holmes.
You know, I just made some really, if you look at it, some really silly mistakes. Mistakes I don't normally make, but I hadn't played in a while, and you know, unfortunately I made those mistakes. I can clean that up.
I'm Alicia Jali, joining us live from our Johannesburg studios. A quick look now at your current news leaders. Parliament's Communications Committee has decided on 5 names to sit on the SABC's interim board. And the Constitutional Court has directed Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini and her department to account for their handling of the social grants contract.
And in tennis, Serena Williams has withdrawn from the BNP Paribas Open in Indian Wells and the Miami Open due to a left knee injury.
We're expecting it to move just in the towards the southern parts of the country, not so much coming towards southern Africa, not even touching the Mozambique channel. It's just going to move back towards the Indian Ocean.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m.
When cell phones get cut off, people say Mdluli was listening. Who are you?
We have to approach Dennis Breitenbach, who was the prosecutor by then.
The DA parliamentarian?
That's correct. The one who was making halabaloo about me.
There are allegations here that you abused the slush fund. What do you say to that?
We don't have slush fund. I don't know about slush fund.
I respect the fact that you cannot talk a lot about the Secret Service and all that. I guess that's the norm internationally.
Yeah.
But how do we know that you, Richard Mdluli, are not abusing the funds of the state? You are counted amongst the president's men. Are you?
That is rubbish.
Also the matter of General Boysen in KZN. He's not speaking very well of you.
No, that one is talking rubbish.
You are perceived to be very powerful, General, and, you know, people who don't agree with you seem to pay the price. What is happening with the old Paramaribe case?
No, I'm surprised because, as I've said, I'm a person of people.
Rights and recourse tackles constitutional issues.
When South Africa became a constitutional democracy, we had a fairly sound legal system in place requiring the Constitution to guide the direction in which it must go, and the way in which it must be refashioned.
The Justice Ministry, the custodian of human rights.
We actually have a plan to come up with a comprehensive review of our human rights instrument.
Advocates dealing with evidence.
Sometimes you have to use a crook to catch a crook. So we expected that credibility would really be taken to task. You try and consult your witnesses and prepare them as best as you can.
Hashtag Rights with Dumila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African time.
Welcome to you today to this, the last hour of Newsroom on this beautiful day that we've got today. We're changing roles today where I start the show, and Eben is going to be, well, my wingman.
I'll be the wingman. I'll be the sports anchor. Yes, that's it. That's how we go. Change is as good as a holiday, they say. We always have to kind of change in order to grow. But our focus doesn't change because it's on child killings today, and we've had lots of tweets and lots of discussion around it. But it's just disturbing.
It is incredibly disturbing, especially the little story that you shared with me a little earlier about how people interact with this kind of story on social media. But we wanted to find out from you, really, what are we missing with regards to the child murders in South Africa? Because it's becoming endemic.
Yeah, it is becoming endemic, and we have to be honest about that. You guys have been tweeting us around this for the last couple of hours. The thing that worries me a little bit is sometimes when I put up a picture, I get 400 likes, but when I put on child murders, I get 20 likes. And Brigger Bricks says, increase school-level security, neighborhood watch, and visible police. And last, don't be a coward because we know the killers and the rapers. And you are right, my friend.
Anele Calvin says, being in prison is better than staying in poverty. You kill, you have 3 meals a day. You don't kill, you won't have a meal.
That is my tweet of the day, because it's a reality. It's out there. It's real. If you have nothing on the outside, sometimes it's better on the inside, is what he's saying. But we're also running a poll today because we have more issues of racism. It's a scourge that South Africa just can't overcome, is it?
A heavy news day, as you can tell. And we're asking you on our poll for this morning, is racism still a problem in our schools? We've got 95 votes that have come in here.
Yeah, and the vast majority say yes. And for me, that's quite sad because 25 years later almost, and in our schools, where we should be learning what comes next in our country, racism still prevails, and the vast majority of people are saying, yes, it is.
Now, that's something that's definitely disturbing, a trend that has not going away, but we definitely need to be talking about it. But also something that we really feel that we need to be talking about today is about the sporting world and what also happens
Here's a tweet
outside.
before you go.
Here's a tweet.
Yeah, we've got that. It's a disease that circulates through an insecure person's minds. It's a weakness that has become an inheritance to children. Ikonanato, you are on point with that, my friend.
And Kolani comes in with racism and xenophobic attitudes in children is a result of what they learn from home.
Yeah.
Charity begins at home, so can prejudice begin at home.
A lot of the prejudice we see in our society today, Kolani, is exactly what you say. It starts at home, and we should really bring our children up better. Of course, we're also asking a sports question today, Kendall. Should the Champions Trophy be called off for security reasons because terror attacks are affecting the lives of people in the streets in London?
Absolutely, and we're looking at Europe to become the new chapter in where terror attacks happen. And we just recently had Manchester and now London, and we've got the IC Champions Trophy being held right there. We want to find out from you, our viewer, what do you think?
Our cricket team is going to be in England for 3 months.
3 months.
They are going to be exposed for 3 months to the possibility of terror attacks. Should we revisit this? Should we rethink about this? This one from Kulma, who says, I live in London and I think it's immature to call for a cancellation of the games as you will be making terrorism win. Correct, but why do England then call off games in Pakistan? Why do they call off games in Zimbabwe? There were even threats of calling off games in South Africa.
Absolutely. Kuma, please do respond to that as well. Let us know what you think. Michael Bigham's-Tole says, no, I'm 100%. The UK has enough security, resources to curb out any terror threat. The show must go on. But we had Manchester, and just a few weeks later, we've got London. Do they really have enough security to curb?
Yeah, less than 2 weeks later, actually. Nozi Komete says, absolutely, they should call it off. Because, imagine, sports events being targeted now, and it's not the sports men and women, they're secure. It's those fans in the streets that are at risk.
It's you and I that are going there as punters. And Tanga Singare says it should have been called off, but you know the British and Americans or their relatives, they control the world. Most countries dance to your tunes.
Tanga is right at the heart of it, putting the finger right on the ulcer, as it were.
Absolutely. In fact, talking of which, I think putting our finger on the ulcer, let's put our finger on the pulse and get to right to with our big stories for the day.
Here we go.
A statement in which Lesotho Deputy Prime Minister Mothetjwa Metsing tells his supporters that they have to protect the army because it helped them into power is trending and attracting many questions. And there may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings in Gauteng after identikits of 2 suspects in the murder case of a 9-year-old boy from Johannesburg were released. And the principal of Northcliff High in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark, has spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offense caused to Muslim learners and their families. And of course, we'll also be bringing you news from the sporting world, and even let's go to the headlines.
Yeah, let's take a look at the top sports stories.
He's got all the qualities, all of the qualities that you want from your captain.
Bafana Bafana coach Stuart Baxter makes no bones about making Thulani Hlatshwayo his captain.
Hopefully we can get off to a good start, get out of the blocks. Is that what this team actually needs at this point in time? Just a little bit of confidence.
Ahead of the crucial test season opener against France, Alistair could say he's hopeful and slightly optimistic for a win at the weekend. And Andy Murray is back to his best as he thrashes Karen Khachanov in straight sets to storm into the French Open quarterfinals. Well, those are your top sports stories at this hour, but let's go over to the news desk for your latest updates.
Eben, thank you very much. Good morning to you. You're watching Newsroom. A statement made by Lesotho Deputy Prime Minister Mothetjwa Metsing, urging his supporters to protect the army because it helped them into power, is trending and raising a lot of questions. Speaking at an impromptu gathering at his party headquarters in Maseru, Metsing admitted they didn't perform as well as they'd hoped in the elections, presumably referring to an election pact he went into with Prime Minister Pagarita Musisidi.
He says they have to talk to other parties, even those that were their enemies. He says the army put its head on the block for them to be in power now. They can't let Thabani win. They have to protect them.
Earlier on, we spoke to SABC News reporter Ntakwana Ngatani about developments on this story.
The Deputy Prime Minister was not aware that what he was saying would cause so much traction. Because the opposition is reading a lot more into the statement than what probably he intended. And when we had a conversation with his spokesperson this morning, and that is the spokesperson of the Lesotho Congress for Democracy, Debo Sekata, he says to us what the Deputy Prime Minister meant in that statement was that in 2014, August 30th, now, this is a date that is remembered by all in Lesotho because the army surrounded police stations and said it was disarming elements in the police force. And subsequently, Prime Minister Tom Thabane said that it was an attempted coup by then Army Commander Tlhadika Modi, but the army said it was disarming police after it learned that there were elements in the police who were intending to massacre Congress supporters who were going to march. And Sekata says Metsing is referring to that incident in which he says if the army had not come to their defense then, they would not be alive as Congress leaders and supporters, and therefore they would not have taken over government. But because of the events of this weekend, it is difficult to not associate the behavior of the army and its deployment at polling stations with the fact that the government probably does not want to give up power. And now the statement, which is now being misconstrued or construed by the opposition to mean that the army should not allow Thabane to take over. So a lot of connotations around the statement. Metsing has not yet explained what he meant, but this is what Sekata says, his spokesperson.
Now, the statement made by the Deputy Prime Minister, Mothetjwa Metsing, has surprised many, as he had earlier on made a commitment that all parties would accept the result. Our foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena, spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister in Maseru, Lesotho.
If you consider the climate now in Lesotho is peaceful, and I agree with the elections, and we are hoping all the leadership is going to accept the outcome of the elections. But what is important is that there is peace now in the country. And SADC has done so much. We commend SADC. We are grateful of the support that we are continuously receiving from SADC. But we need not say that, as you are suggesting, that we must move with speed. No, this is a Basotho program. We need to ensure that these reforms are actually beneficial to this country. After these reforms, we need to be saying that no, good foundation has been laid, and we are sure that the country will never, ever engage in this sorts of political instability that we have gone through.
There may be a possible breakthrough in the spate of child killings in Gauteng. Identikits of two people suspected of kidnapping and killing a 9-year-old boy from Orange Farm south of Johannesburg have been released. Keketso Mahlakwana was snatched outside his Lenasia school on May the 16th and his body found 3 days later. Police are now widening the scope of their investigation to see if the suspects can be linked to other abduction cases.
A senseless killing. Little Keketso kidnapped by 3 occupants of a combi and his body found here with multiple stab wounds. Now police believe they are close to arrests. These 2 of the 3 suspected killers.
There were 3 people who were in the Kumbi, 1 female and 2 males. So far, we are trying to get the person who can assist us with the other ID kit. And we will make sure that we interlink with the other cases and see if these suspects who were involved in the kidnapping of the boy were not linked to other cases.
The statistics indicate a war on children like Keketso. While the boy's family is still demanding answers, an impassioned plea.
I would like to call to all the people at large, the community, to assist the police into finding the perpetrators, because of already there's 2 people who have been positively identified, and we just need closure.
The Mahlakwanas hope that the brutal death of their son will be the last. Griselda Lewis, SABC News in Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, learners and teachers from Cedar High School in Rocklands, Mitchell's Plain, were expected to embark on a march against violence against women and children this morning. Organisers of the march say violence affects everyone. The march follows a number of recent incidents in Cape Town in which children were reported missing, were later found dead. In most cases, they were killed by people known to them. It is reported that close to 20 children have been killed in the Western Cape since January. Now, Pretoria police are looking into claims that the bodies of 3 people found in Centurion yesterday are those of a family abducted from Northcliff in northern Johannesburg on Sunday night. Police have opened a case of murder. The 2 adults and a teenager were apparently bound, gagged and burned alive. Police spokesperson Kema Kubele says DNA forensic tests will be conducted. Now we're asking you, with regards to the very same, what are we missing with regards to child murders in South Africa? You have been tweeting us throughout the course of the show. We'd like to see what else you've got to say, and make sure that you use our Facebook handle and as well as our Twitter page. Moving on to other stories, police have confirmed they're now investigating the murder of Escom employee Thembisile Yende. Post-mortem results have shown that Yende suffered head injuries and bruises on her neck before she died. Yende was reported missing last month and was found 10 days later in her locked office at the Power Utilities substation in Springs on Gauteng's East Rand. She was laid to rest last Saturday, with the family still demanding answers to the mysterious circumstances surrounding her death. Police are appealing to anyone with information to assist with the investigation. Now, the principal of Northcliff High in Johannesburg, Walter Essex Clark, has spoken out about the school's concession card controversy, apologizing for any offence caused to Muslim learners and their families. The issue arose when an upset parent took to social media, questioning why her daughter had to carry a special card stating that she had been granted permission to wear a headscarf for religious purposes. While Essex Clark did apologize, he added that concession cards had been implemented years ago and did not apply only to Muslim learners.
We've given them this concession card so that any teacher querying their different attire can see that their uniform is legitimate and done with the full permission of the school's management. The idea has been, the last two that I gave out were for two boys who were in our major production that wanted to grow their hair longer for the roles that they were playing on the stage. Those are the last two that I signed.
Meanwhile, South Africans from across the country have taken to social media to express their disgust as an audio clip of a Pietermaritzburg Girls High School student using the K word to describe black students trended. Right, now, with all of that in mind, we're asking you a poll, and would like to find out from you, is racism still a problem in South African schools? Like earlier, you have been tweeting us, and we're definitely very interested to see what the rest of your comments are. Of the votes that have come in, an overwhelming majority, 89%, believe that yes, racism is still a problem in our schools. Qatar is calling for talks to end a major diplomatic row which has seen Saudi Arabia and several other neighboring countries cut links with the Gulf state. The foreign ministry says all sides should sit down and resolve all their differences through dialogue. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has also spoken with the leaders of Qatar, Russia, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to try and lower the tension in the region. Meanwhile, earlier in our Pretoria studios, we were joined by Professor Iqbal Jazbai, an international relations and Islamic specialist at UNISA, and this is what he had to say.
There have been a range of tensions between Qatar and its neighbors, but it has not reached this point where the neighboring Gulf states of Saudi Arabia, Emirates and Bahrain have decided to slap on Qatar road sanctions, air freight, as well as maritime ties. So the build-up is of a significant one compared to the one which happened more recently in 2014.
Yeah, but Prof, why the sudden decision to break off diplomatic ties with Qatar? I mean, we're reading now that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have recalled their diplomats from Qatar as well. And we've also seen that Qatar nationals have also been given 2 weeks to leave. What has caused all those ties to be cut off?
There seems to be some consensus amongst analysts that the recent visit of the U.S. President Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia seems to have emboldened Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, the Emirates to make an attempt to convince or blockade Qatar to review its position, at least on a number of issues. One is the fact that Qatar has an independent position on engaging with Iran, a regional power. And then also, Qatar has another position when it comes to dealing with Muslim groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is a sore bone of contention between Egypt and Qatar, as well as Saudi Arabia. And also the fact that Qatar believes that you should come up with a different foreign policy model, including a robust free press And the Jazeera TV has always been a point of contention between Qatar and its neighbors. But it's interesting in all of this, two other Gulf states, Kuwait to the north and Oman to the south, have similar positions on question of Iran or the Muslim Brotherhood, but they've managed to sidestep these tensions. There seems to be some deeper issues which have suddenly cropped up, but there's no doubt they've been emboldened recently by the visit of President Trump and the fact that he has taken a very hostile position towards Iran, and they feel now is the time to really blockade and make this type of arrangement of a full blockade on Qatar. So we'll wait and see how this unfolds in the coming days.
Now, TransUnion Africa has warned consumers to control credit behavior. The organization last week released a consumer credit index which showed that several South African households appear to be in better shape to weather economic storms compared to the same period last year. To talk to us about some of the findings contained in the report, we were joined in studio by TransUnion Africa's CEO, Lee Naik.
Released the Q1 report, which sums up January, February and March of 2017. It's actually pretty good news compared to where we were last year, where we saw a period of consolidation, where we saw a lending environment that was a lot stricter on the back of the National Credit Act. We also saw that individuals were starting to think about how they spend and where they spend. And the good news is that at the back of the first 3 months of this year, we saw that the index actually climbed the 50 mark on our index to end up at 52.4. So that tells us that some of the good behaviors that were starting to manifest in 2016 have started to benefit us as consumers. What does it mean practically? It means that all the NCA requirements on the lenders on making sure that everyone has the ability to afford their credit and take on new debt, as well as all the requirements to educate people better, has started to happen. And these same consumers starting to make better decisions in their life. So all in all, really good feedback on the back of the first 3 months of the year.
What do we see? Is it a question that the man in the street is heeding all the calls to save some money, to spend a little bit less of money that they don't have?
I think it's a combination of two things. One, it's much harder to get access to credit in terms of these new laws and new regulations on affordability. But also the man in the street realizes that it's a tough environment to be in, fiscally and politically. So in that regard, how do you start to live in the here and now and make decisions in your life about what you need to do to drive your day-to-day living? And what I've started to see is the behavior that people are saying, what do I need now versus what I may need in future, and start to spend and save accordingly.
Are we likely to see this trend? Are we likely to see it continue into the second quarter and maybe continue throughout the rest of the year?
Well, we're not sure at this stage. We're already into the first 2 months of this next quarter. And what we do know is that we do have some political uncertainties in the country. We've also got some macroeconomical variables that are featuring globally as well as locally. And only time will tell in terms of what it may mean for the report. What we have seen, if you compare quarter on quarter, is the index has improved. And given the stability of some of these indices, the overall view is that credit health is much better. We do not, however, know what it may mean in terms of inflation rates and interest rates.
One of the key factors has been the rand. The rand's been holding steady despite the uncertainty that we've seen even after the cabinet reshuffle, the recent one that we have. Is that going to continue?
Well, we're not sure about the interest rate, but what we have seen is that the cash flow that households have has been under pressure for quite a while. But given the stability in the rand, and even though the inflation rate has been quite stubborn, it's been quite consistent over the last while. People have been able to figure out how to take their limited disposable incomes and use it more effectively. Of course, that will come under strain as the interest rate cycle ups, should it in future.
Of course, 2019 will be a landmark year for us. Politically, we see a lot of pronouncements being made in the political space. 2019, December, will be the big month with an elective conference coming up for the governing party here in South Africa. How do we expect the run-up to all of this to affect how we live?
Well, I think there'll be a period of uncertainness as a country. We're not sure where the elective conference will take us later in the year. And all I can say is that we can control variables under our control as citizens and as consumers. And what I will clearly say is that as we go forward into a period of uncertainty or uncertainty, let's start to think about those choices we make on taking on new debt. And I've seen some really good behaviors over the last while. For example, in the retail sector, as opposed to shopping at the first store that you've always shopped at, you may now have choices in terms of the commoditization of these products. Even in the vehicle space, we've seen that people are holding onto their vehicles a lot longer than they have previously. So I think that behavior should continue in the era of uncertainty. Control those variables that are under your personal control.
Just for those who are not au fait with it, just give us a quick rundown of what the Consumer Credit Index actually is and how it affects the lives of those, the men and women in the streets today.
So very simply, the Consumer Credit Index is put together on the basis of available objective data that combines both TransUnion's data of consumer credit behavior. So we track almost 54 million people in the country, of which 24 million are credit active. We combine that with publicly available data, for example, the interest rates, as well as data from the Reserve Bank and Stats SA. When you put this objective data together, it gives us what we call a diffusion index that tells us the health of the credit industry. And in very simple terms for the man on the street, the higher the index, the better the people are at managing their own finances, and the better they are at making decisions on which credit facilities to take on.
In conclusion, if you have a message to South Africans out there who are in a little bit of debt right now and who are thinking of ways to alleviate the situation, what would that be in the short term?
I would say, firstly, understand your current financial situation. Take the time to understand whether it's in living off cash instruments or whether you have credit facilities with many banks. Access your credit report via TransUnion or the many other bureaus available in the country. When you get your report, start to understand which is that high interest debt and start to pay that off. And when you start to understand the insights into your finances, you can make much more prudent decisions. Secondly, when new debt potentially comes to your door, ask yourself, do you really need to take on the new debt? Can you save for it? Or could you postpone it to another time, maybe next year?
Well, Lee, that's the good news. There's always hope, and we're behaving a little bit better, according to Lee Naik, who's the CEO of TransUnion Africa. South Africans, according to the latest Consumer Credit Index, are behaving a little bit better, and we're getting a little bit more prudent with our money, but we need to do more. In the Western Cape, they say they are working to avoid taps from running dry as the province continues to struggle through the drought. Water shortages have seen 6 areas, including Cape Town, being declared local disasters. Several municipalities are enforcing tight restrictions as provincial dam levels have now dropped below 19% this week. Long-term rainfall forecasts for this winter is still unclear in the Western Cape. Are there plans in place to assist the Western Cape, and are other provinces safe from this drought? To find out, well, we are joined by the Department of Water and Sanitation spokesperson, Sputnik Ratau. He's in our Pretoria studio this morning. Sputnik, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Yemen, and thanks for the time.
Sputnik, the weatherman tells me that there's a massive storm coming tomorrow to the Cape, but that's not going to help in the immediate term. Are there plans to assist the Western Cape with this crisis?
Yes, we are working together with the province of the Western Cape and especially the city of Cape Town in order to try and bring relief to the area in a number of ways. One of which obviously is the issue of looking at how we can be able to access about the 10% that is still available in the Drought Dam through the creation of a tunnel that will then be able to allow us to access that water. Another way in which we are working together with the city and the province is through looking at accessing the group aquifer at Table Mountain that can be able to also assist us in terms of accessing extra water. What the minister has also agreed to do, or rather given directive to do, is to fast-track the fuel flare augmentation program and has given a directive to the Trans-Caledon Transfer Authority, the TCTA, to actually work closer to doing this in a quicker way. And we are looking at commencement by the beginning of 2018 to bring this to pass. But also looking at what we can do in terms of the fuel flare augmentation project so that we can be able to see how we can be able to access the bit of water that is still available in these critical dams that serve especially the city of Cape Town.
Sputnik, these are all wonderful plans and very necessary, but the critics in Cape Town are saying that these plans should all have been implemented 15 years ago. Why weren't it?
Well, the difficulty with a drought, Eben, is that you can never tell what kind of impact it will have at any one time. And the truth of the matter is that the plans to augment the fuel flare as well as the issues of looking at the aquifer have always been there. What needs to happen now is that we need to fast track those. It's not like they were not, they have not been in the pipeline. But obviously, all of these things need time. All of these things need proper planning. All of these things need proper funding, and so on and so forth. So it's something that we have been looking at, and that is why it has been part of our plans all the time.
Now, Sputnik, of course, it's not only Cape Town that's suffering. Give us a quick overview. What does the picture look in the rest of the country? The Eastern Cape, I understand, are also suffering a little bit.
The Eastern Cape even also did not receive that great amount of rainfall over the past rainy season. And yes, the dam levels there are actually lower than they were a year ago. And therefore, the issue of water availability in the Eastern Cape is a challenge that we are looking at. And part of what we are hoping that will assist is the early snowfalls that we are seeing in that part of that we have seen in that part of the country, together with the mountainous areas of KZN and Lesotho. And what we are looking at also is some of the other plans that we might need to bring ahead of time in order for us to be able to look at that. But also we must keep reminding ourselves that as a country, unless we really look at the issue of water saving and water conservation, we will always get into these things, even if we do receive sufficient rainfall.
Now, you talk about that rainfall, Sputnik, it looks like we might get a massive storm in the Western Cape, in the catchment area specifically, in the next couple of days, and that's the good news. But that doesn't mean that people should change their behavior.
It doesn't mean that people should change the behavior, because even what those storms might actually create are flash floods in certain areas. And you might find that in the ultimate, the catchment areas may not necessarily be recharged as sufficiently as we would love them to be. So the issue of the first thing is the issue of looking of people looking after themselves. That is why the Provincial Disaster Management Center will be putting out will be sharing a report this morning within the province as to what the expectations are. And that report must inform how the people in the affected areas must look at those gale force winds, those amounts of rainfall that will come in, because we will be looking at some rains coming in, but also just for people to be careful around those waters, because in case of flash floods, we might have to look at how people are assisted to be able to continue with save lives.
Sputnik, thank you very much for that update. That's Sputnik Qatar. He's the spokesperson for the Department of Water and Sanitation here in South Africa. And if you're living in Cape Town, in the Eastern Cape, 100 litres a day, that's what you have to use for the foreseeable future until that level 4 restrictions are lifted.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Welcome back. It's time for the sports now, and top of our stories for today is really about how the African Under-20 champions, the Junior Chipolopolo of Zambia, have been eliminated from the Under-20 World Cup after losing to Italy by the narrow margin of 3-2. This in the quarterfinal played yesterday in South Korea. Zambia shocked the footballing world by beating most of their favourite opponents, included Portugal and Germany, but couldn't get past Italy. African national teams have failed to translate the performance of their junior national teams at a FIFA World Cup tournament where only Cameroon, Senegal and Ghana have managed to reach the quarterfinal stage. What happens to African national teams at the senior international football tournaments? That's why we've got Joseph Mutsiwa to find out, what do you think? Good morning to you and welcome to Newsroom.
Good morning, Kano, and thanks for having me here.
So, first up, Zambia get knocked out, 3-2, very close margin. They beat Portugal, they beat Germany. Fantastic results, get themselves into that space where they can contend and be counted as one of the stronger teams at the Under-20 FIFA World Cup. What do you make of their performance leading up to yesterday's result?
Of course, I mean, it has to be said that, and we have to applaud the Zambian Junior Chipolopolo, Kendall, it must be said. You look at how they started the whole tournament. They really went, to Korea Republic just to make their intentions very clear from the onset. And, winning their first game as well as their second game, but also losing their third group matches. But overall, you talk about the exciting young squad that this Junior Polo side has. I think for me, it's something that the Zambian national team will have to look up to, because these boys are only 20 years old, some 19, some 18, Kendall. So you can really see from now on going forward that the future for this young side really, really looks bright. But overall, their performance against the Italians yesterday, it was a brilliant performance, one must say. I mean, it was just, an exciting football to watch. But then again, it has to be said that playing attacking and attractive football and, making those creating those chances in the final third and not converting your chances, in most instances, it comes back to haunt you. And that is exactly what happened to the Italians. We know the Italians, they play to their strength. They're very rock solid in defense, in midfield. And after being reduced to 10 men, we have to also point out the video technology that came into play, which I think it is a step forward in football. But then again, you look at how the referees and the linesmen, everybody involved, got it completely wrong this time around. So it does say that video technology, after all, is not infallible.
No, thank you very much for bringing that point. For me, it's a pet project of mine of how football has joined what you would call the 21st century. But now, right now, our viewers were looking at visuals of Senegal, you know, as they lost their match and so on. But Senegal and South Africa, they're gone, they're out. Group stages didn't get very far. You talk about converting chances when you get them. The big teams that succeed always get half a chance and then make it a goal. What is going on in African football that chances get created and they don't get buried?
I mean, Kendall, you look at the first game of Amajida against Japan. You know, we dominated that game, there's no doubt about it. Created so many chances in front of goals. But then again, you know, just being composed in front of goal and making sure that you take your chances, I think that for me is something that the likes of Thabo Senong has to look at and really, really investigate. But then again, you look at primarily in South Africa, you know, some of the big, you know, top players in the PSL that are playing for the likes of Bidvest, Kaizer Chiefs, Orlando Pirates. You don't get a player who scores you those goals week in and week out. And perhaps maybe we then have to look back at the development side of things. Are we really giving these boys, you know, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds enough time to develop as far as making sure that going forward they're able to know when it comes to a big stage, a large stage, they can stand their ground and perform at the highest level?
You transition to the senior side, which is part of the conversation I really wanted to have. One of the things that we've always seen is it's only really Cameroon and Ghana that have gotten to the quarterfinal stage, beyond the quarterfinal, well, to the quarterfinal stages of the FIFA World Cup. 1990 and most recently here in 2010. In between and before and post that, African sides get absolutely nowhere. They also rans, they dazzle, they show fighting spirit, they maybe get out of the group stages, and that's about it. What is it? Is it because of the coaching staff that the teams have got in place? Is it because of lack of development, which you brought up? But that's been a bugbear and a buzzword for almost 2, 3, 4 decades in South African, in African football. What are the issues there?
I mean, you look at, for example, the Black Stars of Ghana, back here in South Africa in 2010 World Cup, they went through to the quarterfinal stages and, you know, by just the neck of it, they could have gone through to the semi-finals and we would have had a first African team having played at the World Cup in the semi-finals. But then again, we talk about, you know, making decisions that really count at the end of the day, waiting for that right moment, Kendall, to make sure that when it matters the most, you are there. You put your name in the limelight. You put your flag of your African country in the limelight. But again, it wasn't to be for the Black Stars of Ghana. Looking overall at the likes of Nigeria, your Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, we know that Cameroon are going to be playing or representing Africa now at the Confederations Cup. I mean, it awaits to be seen as to what's going to happen there. What is Hugo Broos going to do there? He's brought in some senior players to the Cameroonian side. But then again, after having won the AFCON, it awaits to be seen as to what next for them.
You talk of Hugo Broos, not born on the continent. There's Everena, Claude Leroy. What African coaches ply their trade in Europe that you know of?
Kendall, we know that...
none, absolutely none.
That's nothing, yeah.
Exactly, and isn't that part of the equation? That we get to where we get to because we don't have any coaches that are considered good enough to operate in Europe. What we do instead is bring in coaches that, hey, they don't even coach top-tier football teams in Portugal, in Greece, in England, in Italy. Hugo Broos, Claude Leroy, Everena, they've been recycled over and over again, and none of them could walk into any top-tier football league anywhere in Europe, yet they coach the royalty of African football. How does that work?
But then again, it boils down to perhaps maybe, you know, the experience as well as the qualification that comes in. I mean, when you look at on an African continent as a whole, you really don't have, Kendall, your top-notch quality coaches that we can say this guy deserves to be in a national coach, such as, you know, Senegal or Cameroon or whatever the case is. I mean, you look right now at, you know, Mark Wilmots, who is the current coach of Cote d'Ivoire.
They got lost 4-0 to the Netherlands just now. They went all the way to Holland and got clapped 4-0.
Of course, I mean, for me, I think it's one of those things where I mean, Mark Wilmots was a coach of Belgium. He really didn't succeed there with some of the best players that were exposed to him, the likes of Eden Hazard, Romelu Lukaku, were exposed to those kind of players. But he didn't really do much at the World Cup in 2014, but also last year in the Euros in France. He didn't really do well. So it beats me as to what is it that we, on an African scale, look at as far as hiring coaches and making sure that we...
I think, on the button there, I mean, you actually just gave a litany of failures that Mark Wilmots has had, and all of a sudden he's coaching Ivory Coast, and, and that really is a question. And do you see how African coaches can get to be in a space where they're competing for top jobs in Europe? Do you see that happening at any time?
I think it's going to happen. I think right now we can see the likes of, your Benny McCarthy's of this world, I mean, having received their, coaching licenses. So it's happening slowly but surely. But it's not going to happen overnight, Kendall, it has to be said, because we know that the Europeans likes making sure that they hire their own coaches. They like
Europeans.
They like Europeans. They like to look locally, and if they're going to look into Africa, you really have to be that good to actually be part of their plan going forward.
Joseph Mmutsiwa, thank you very much for that. I think there's so much more that you and I can dig into to just unearth some of those things that are missing. We didn't touch much on development. There's so much that we can talk about, as well as African coaches and what they do and their qualifications. I really appreciate your insights. I think there's a lot more that we can talk about. Thanks very much for coming through to chat to us this morning.
Thank you so much, Kendall.
There you have it. Joseph Mmutsiwa telling us that, Africans need to start liking Africans. That's why we leave it with that particular story. Moving on to other stories this weekend at the Mangaung Indoor Sports Centre in Bloemfontein. The top 4 teams on the Brutal Fruit Netball Premier League standings will square up in the semi-finals of the tournament. The teams are Gauteng North Jaguars, Northwest Flames, the Western Cape Southern Stings, and the Gauteng Golden Fireballs. Gauteng is the only province that had 2 teams in the 10-team league, and they're both in the semi-finals.
It's a privilege to have such a big platform of players that's so good, so that we can have 2 Gauteng teams. So it's going to be great. I think there's going to be great netball coming. And from this weekend, it's a total new game. It's anyone's game. We're all friends, like I say, but on court, we just a bunch of players playing the game. So I think, like Shadine also said, may the best team win.
We got into this competition like open-minded because it's just so great that the top 4 teams are like equally matched, and I think it's just so great that we can use that talent to showcase, and it's just great. It doesn't matter if you're top or now 4th in the log now. The game's going to be brutal now from this start, and a whole different tournament starting from this weekend.
Now to tennis, where world number 1 Andy Murray is steamrolling his way to the final of the French Open tennis tournament at Roland Garros in Paris. The Scotsman beat 21-year-old Russian Karen Khachanov in straight sets to advance to the quarterfinals. Kevin Anderson was 1 set down and 3-love down against Marin Cilic when injury to the South African brought a premature end to their 4th round match.
Murray hasn't had the best of clay court seasons prior to the French Open and came into the 2nd Grand Slam event of the year lacking confidence. It showed in his earlier matches, but he's improving with each match he plays. The Brit breezed past the Russian with a 6-3, 6-4, 6-4 victory. His next opponent is Japan's 9th seed Kei Nishikori, who beat unseeded Spaniard Fernando Verdasco in 4 sets. Romanian 3rd seed Simona Halep has emerged as the favourite for the title in the women's singles. The former world number 2, who relied on pinpoint ground strokes, punished everything short from Spain's Carla Suarez Navarro. The Spaniard felt that pressure and the unforced errors rolled off her racket. Halep cruised to a 6-1, 6-1 victory in exactly an hour.
That'll do it for the number 3 seed.
She will now play 5th seed Elena Svitolina of the Ukraine in the quarterfinal. Svitolina came from 2-5 down in the 3rd set to beat qualifier Petra Martic of Croatia 4-6, 6-3, 7-5. Anton Snyman, SABC News.
For Elena Svitolina, 2 points from defeat there in that final set.
And on that victory note, that's where we leave it with the sport. That's where we leave it with the Newsroom, where we do leave you with the weather forecast. Make sure you come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Bye-bye.
World.